Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this what if story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by AlexandrianAce on Wattpad. Now let's start. Izuku Midoriya was an ordinary 6-year-old boy with dreams of becoming a hero, or so it appeared to those around him. He was still mastering his quirk, alteration, which allowed him to change his appearance into anything he had seen before. He could also transform inanimate objects into living creatures, like turning a rock into a bird. However, his father, Hisashi Midoriya, deemed the quirk useless, often telling Izuku that he might as well be quirkless. 9 years earlier, Izuku had just returned home from playing with his friend, Kacchan, also known as 𝐾𝐮𝐬. They had been friends for as long as he could remember. Upon entering the house, he found his mother, Izuku Midoriya, sitting on the couch with a half-empty bottle of sake. It had been a month since Hisashi was arrested for attempted murder and armed robbery. Since then, Izuku had taken over the role of tormenting Izuku daily. As he attempted to sneak past her unnoticed, a small knife flew from the kitchen, grazing his leg. This was the result of his mother's quirk, telekinesis, albeit a weak form that allowed her to move only small objects. Pain surged through Izuku as he fell to the floor, overwhelmed by the sensation. He had never experienced anything like it before. Izuku approached him, her voice dripping with disdain as she accused him of causing his father's departure. Thus began the darkest years of his life, even worse than those spent with Hisashi. Presently, 14-year-old Izuku awoke to the blaring of his alarm clock. He glanced at the time, noting it was 4:30 a.m., and sighed heavily. Another day awaited him. He shuffled to his closet to retrieve his middle school uniform. After dressing, he hurried into the bathroom, locking the door to avoid any projectiles from his mother. After 10 minutes of silent tears, Izuku washed away the remnants of the previous day's pain and bandaged his arm, which bore the marks of his struggles. As he grabbed his bag and prepared to leave, another knife narrowly missed him, slicing through the air beside his ear. His mother's voice echoed from behind the wall, taunting him about leaving without saying goodbye. Izuku stammered an apology, his body trembling under the weight of her words. She belittled him, declaring him pathetic for not being able to say goodbye properly. Fear gripped him as he rushed out of their small apartment, glancing at his watch and realizing he had only 5 minutes to reach class. In a moment of desperation, he transformed into an oversized gray and green cat and dashed toward school. Later, during his last class, the teacher concluded a lecture on the origins of quirks and began praising the students for their abilities. Izuku received nothing but disdainful looks and harsh words from his classmates, who often threatened him and suggested he should end his own life. They believed he was quirkless since he never used his abilities, and even the teachers pretended not to know the truth. Only Kacchan was aware of Izuku's quirk, yet he played along with the narrative, calling him Deku, a term that meant useless or failure. The teacher asked 𝗶𝗸 if he planned to attend high school. 𝗶𝗸 responded with arrogance, asserting that his classmates were merely stepping stones for his ascent to greatness. When the teacher turned to Izuku, asking if he intended to apply to the room erupted in laughter and insults. 𝗶𝗸 stood next to Izuku's desk, small explosions erupting from his hands as he taunted him. Izuku, weary and resigned, stated that he had a quirk and intended to use it. The teacher excused himself, leaving 𝗶𝗸 and his friends to continue their torment. 𝗶𝗸 shouted at Izuku, declaring him useless and asserting his own ambition to become the #1 hero. Izuku, feeling a mix of pain and defiance, retorted that no one would willingly follow someone like 𝗶𝗸, whom he likened to an oversized bomber dog. 𝗶𝗸's fury escalated, and he slammed his hand on Izuku's desk, accompanied by a small explosion. He suggested that Izuku should jump off the tallest building, claiming nobody would miss him. The class erupted in laughter as they left, and when the teacher returned, he imposed a fine on Izuku for the burn mark on the desk. Quietly, Izuku packed his belongings and handed over his lunch money for the month before leaving the classroom. Later, During the infamous slime incident, All Might had just shattered Izuku's hopes of becoming a hero. He told Izuku that his quirk was more suited for villainy than heroics, leaving him devastated. As tears streamed down his face, Izuku stood alone, his silent sobs echoing in the emptiness around him. He observed as All Might made his way toward the area filled with explosions about 6 miles away. The heroes must all be there, he thought. He felt a sense of determination as he quickly retrieved a piece of paper and a pen, writing fervently. He expressed his complicated feelings toward his mother, acknowledging the love that still lingered despite the pain she had caused him. He reflected on the hurtful words she had spoken, labeling him a failure and expressing regret over his existence. He imagined a scenario where he could escape the torment, envisioning a moment of peace away from the suffering he endured. He considered how she might react to the news of his departure, picturing her satisfaction in knowing she played a role in his struggles. He recalled All Might's words, suggesting he might have been better suited as a villain given his quirk. He thought of Kacchan and felt a sense of gratitude for the lessons learned about confronting his pain. He addressed whoever might find his message, expressing doubt that anyone would care about him. He reflected on the harsh words he had heard daily, feeling invisible and unwanted. He hoped that if someone discovered him, it would be his mother, as he had reached his limit. He wished for his release and believed that everyone would be better off without him. He wrote a note to 𝐒𝐮𝐬 𝐼𝐬 and Yamada Hisashi, thanking them for their kindness and support during his darkest times. He appreciated their willingness to help him, even when they were unaware of his struggles. He sent a fond farewell to their cats, hoping to reunite with them someday. With his final thoughts in mind, Izuku Midoriya stood at the edge of the railing, ready to say goodbye to the world around him. Flashback: 𝐒𝐮𝐬 𝐼𝐬 and Yamada Hisashi had been best friends since their time at U. They graduated earlier than they had anticipated and became pro-heroes. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 took on the role of the underground hero, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐻, whose quirk allowed him to erase others' abilities until he blinked. However, this power came with a downside. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 suffered from dry eyes, and prolonged use could temporarily damage his vision. Yamada, on the other hand, became the popular hero known as Present Mic. His quirk, voice, enabled him to amplify his voice dramatically, creating sounds powerful enough to be overwhelming. A few years after graduating, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and Hisashi decided to marry, having been together since their second year at U. A year later, they adopted a baby boy named Hitoshi ♯ They now lived in a comfortable house with 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. One day, Hisashi managed to persuade 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to accompany him on a shopping trip to the mall, much to Hisashi's surprise. They purchased some groceries and, surprisingly, 2 more cats, bringing their total to 8. After leaving the mall, they realized it was quite late, around 11 o'clock at night. Given that they had 2 precious cargo with them, 𝐒𝐮𝐬 opted for the busier, well-lit roads to avoid any potential threats. Hisashi, excitedly looking at 𝐒𝐮𝐬, asked if he thought the others needed more friends. When he turned to find 𝐒𝐮𝐬 missing, he looked back to see his partner staring down a dimly lit alleyway. Concerned, Hisashi approached and noticed 𝐒𝐮𝐬 beckoning him over. As he neared, he heard soft sobbing, which made his heart ache. It sounded like a child in distress. Sure enough, they found a young boy collapsed against the alley wall, clutching his leg and torso. 𝐒𝐮𝐬, feeling out of his element with children, quietly urged Hisashi to take the lead. Hisashi crouched down in front of the boy, gently asking him to look up. The boy, trembling, met his gaze, and Hisashi was taken aback. The child was no older than their son, with striking green eyes that reflected pain and sorrow. His hair was a tangled mess, and his hands were stained red. Hisashi cautiously inquired if the BLD was his or someone else's, preparing himself for any possible danger. The boy moved his hands to reveal several deep cuts. Alarmed, Hisashi called for 𝐒𝐮𝐬 to summon an ambulance, but the boy pleaded desperately against it, insisting he would be fine and just wanted to be left alone. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 knelt beside him, asking for his name. The boy whispered, introducing himself as Izuku Midoriya. The couple exchanged worried glances as Izuku began to cough, struggling to breathe. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 insisted they needed to take him to Recovery Girl, Recalling their experience as pro-heroes taught them the importance of getting victims to the nearest medical source. Hisashi called Recovery Girl, bracing himself for her reaction to the late-night call. Recovery Girl answered, warning Hisashi that he better have a good reason for calling at such an hour. Hisashi explained the situation, feeling anxious about the potential consequences for their cats but equally concerned for the boy. Soon, Izuku fell into a deep sleep, his last memory being a figure in dark clothing urging him to stay awake, but he was too exhausted to comply. 2 days later, Izuku awoke with a start, screaming from a nightmare about his mother. Hisashi, 𝐿𝐬 and Chiyo rushed into the room, their eyes wide with concern. Izuku noticed 𝗟𝗟 peeking in, and it seemed they hadn't slept well, which was mostly true, aside from brief naps. Hisashi approached Izuku slowly, asking if he remembered them. It took a moment for Izuku to recall what had happened after fleeing from his mother's aggression. He began to feel overwhelmed, struggling to breathe as he backed away. Chiyo quickly intervened, instructing him to focus on her voice and match his breathing to the rhythm of her tapping cane. After a few minutes, Izuku calmed enough to speak, pleading not to be sent back, repeating his request with increasing desperation. The adults exchanged worried glances, and 𝐿𝐬, lacking experience with children, bluntly stated that they didn't know him and he would have to return once he recovered. Izuku's face filled with fear, and he fainted. Hisashi scolded 𝐿𝐬 for his insensitivity, while 𝐿𝐬 defended himself, stating he was merely speaking the truth. Hisashi retorted that they didn't need any more troubled children in their lives. Morning, Izuku woke up in an empty room, feeling disoriented. As he sat up, a headache throbbed in his temples but gradually faded. Remembering his situation, he decided he needed to leave before anyone noticed he was awake. Quietly, he slipped out of bed, laced up his Converse, grabbed a hoodie from the small closet, and attempted to sneak out. However, 𝗟𝗓's voice rang out from down the hallway, calling him a problem child and demanding his hoodie back. Izuku glanced down at the hoodie, noting the playful cat designs, and quickly tried to remove it, inadvertently pulling off his shirt in the process. Realizing he needed to escape, he darted toward the open door behind 𝐿𝐬. He dashed away, skillfully evading 𝗟𝗓's outstretched arm. That was the last anyone saw of him for a while. A day later, Izuku was well enough to leave, but upon returning home, he was met with a painful surprise. His mother, furious, confronted him with a harsh accusation. Izuku cried out in agony, still recovering from his previous injuries. She seized him by the hair and pulled him into the kitchen, where she forced his hand onto a scorching hot burner for several agonizing moments. His screams echoed until he could no longer cry out, collapsing into a state of unconsciousness as he dragged himself to his room. This grim cycle of returning to 𝐿𝐬 and Hisashi's home occurred about once a month from that point onward. Present time, 𝐿𝐬 had not seen his favorite problem child in quite some time, so he decided to visit the place where Izuku often spent his evenings until 10 p.m. Hisashi, his partner, accompanied him, missing the boy as well. As they approached the warehouse where Izuku typically lingered, they spotted him sitting perilously close to the edge of the 24-story rooftop. After parking their truck, 𝐿𝐬 and Hisashi exchanged a knowing glance and bypassed the door, opting to scale the fire escape instead. 𝐿𝐬, being an underground hero, had keen hearing at night and caught snippets of Izuku mumbling to himself. A quick glance at Hisashi revealed his partner's face draining of color as he discovered Izuku's note. Before 𝐿𝐬 could react, Hisashi urged him to catch Izuku before he acted on his thoughts. Izuku had transformed into a bird and was ascending higher into the night sky, seemingly intent on increasing his chances of survival should he fall. 𝗟𝗓's mind raced with urgency. Fortunately, he had his capture weapon and quickly fashioned a small net across the alleyway. They looked up just in time to see Izuku plummeting from a height comparable to a 50-story building. Hisashi positioned himself beneath the net, standing on the fire escape, and prepared to unleash one of his most powerful special moves, known as ricochet. This technique involved releasing a silent sound wave that would cause the target to bounce off it, depending on the intensity of the wave. However, it took a toll on his vocal cords, leaving him voiceless for a while afterward. With a silent wave, Hisashi sent Izuku ricocheting off the sound wave, a harsh but preferable alternative to the ground. 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐸 quickly caught him with his capture weapon. Panic surged through 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐸 as he frantically searched for a pulse. Pressing his ear to Izuku's chest, he detected a faint heartbeat. The 𝐒𝐮𝐬 was there. He declared that Izuku was in no condition to be moved and instructed Hisashi to call Chiyo, who would know how to help. Hisashi suggested placing Izuku in the truck's bed, and 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐸 agreed, planning to lower him down with his scarf. Hisashi called Chiyo, who informed them she would arrive in 5 minutes. She had been in a meeting with Nizu, 𝐼𝐻𝐷, and 𝐶𝐼𝐻𝐷, discussing a child who had been injured during training. 𝐼𝐻𝐷's involvement was significant. 𝐼𝐻𝐷 offered to fly Chiyo over for a quicker response to the emergency. When they reached the rooftop, 𝐼𝐻𝐷 froze upon recognizing Izuku. He was filled with dread about how to explain the situation, especially if Izuku woke up. Unbeknownst to him, Izuku had left a note detailing 𝐼𝐻𝐷's previous words to him. Hisashi and 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐸 were furious, and Aizawa's anger reached a boiling point. Despite Hisashi's attempts to calm him, it was too late. Chiyo witnessed 𝐼𝐻𝐷 being pushed against the wall. Once satisfied, 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐸 rushed to Izuku and began speaking to him, hoping he could hear them and hold on just a little longer. In a surprising move, 𝐒𝐮𝐸 began to sing to the fading boy, his appealing baritone voice filling the air, a rare occurrence. Hisashi had only heard him sing once before, years ago when their son 𝗟𝗟𝐿 was practicing his quirk. As 𝐒𝐮𝐸 sang softly to Izuku while he was lowered into the truck, 𝐼𝐻𝐷 returned, looking battered and filled with regret for his earlier words. He realized he had unintentionally taken out his frustrations on a boy who didn't deserve it, and the weight of guilt settled heavily on his shoulders. Little did the heroes know that Izuku's recovery would take longer than anticipated. A frantic 𝐒𝐮𝐸 rushed into the hospital, calling for help for Izuku. Several nurses and a doctor quickly approached him, urging him to remain calm and provide details about the situation. 𝐒𝐮𝐸 informed them that 2 others were bringing Izuku in, who was in critical condition with a faint pulse. He intentionally gave Izuku a different last name to prevent the hospital from contacting his mother. Moments later, 𝐼𝐻𝐷 entered, cradling Izuku gently in his arms, tears streaming down his face. Izuku appeared alarmingly pale. The trauma nurses quickly took charge, assessing the situation. They noted a dangerously low heart rate, dropping BLD pressure, a dislocated shoulder, and cracked vertebrae. They needed to rush him into surgery immediately. The heroes watched helplessly as Izuku was taken away, exchanging worried glances. 𝐼𝐻𝐷, overwhelmed, sank to the floor, his head in his hands, repeating his regrets. In that moment, a voice broke through the tension, suggesting that while 𝐼𝐻𝐷 may have played a role, he was not the only one responsible for the boy's suffering. Hisashi handed 𝐼𝐻𝐷 the letter that Izuku had written. After a few stunned moments, 𝐼𝐻𝐷 expressed his regret, revealing that he had been unaware of the boy's struggles. 𝐒𝐮𝐸, filled with anger, interrupted him, demanding to know what 𝐼𝐻𝐷 had said to Izuku. He emphasized that the boy had looked up to 𝐻𝐷, wanting to emulate him as a hero. Instead, 𝐻𝐷 had told Izuku, who was already suffering, that he could never be a hero and would only become a villain. 𝗟𝗟's fury was palpable, and those around him felt the intensity of his emotions. 𝐻𝐷, determined to help Izuku, admitted his ignorance about the boy's family background, realizing that his father had been a villain. He also learned that Izuku had been enduring severe bullying at school. For the first time, 𝐻𝐷 found himself shedding tears in front of others. Chiyo, 𝐒𝐮𝐸, Hisashi, and the nearby nurses watched in shock as the usually strong hero displayed vulnerability. 𝐒𝐮𝐸 awkwardly offered comfort, reminding 𝐻𝐷 that it was ultimately Izuku's choice to forgive him. 6 hours later, a doctor approached the group. He appeared to be around 70 years old, and his name tag read 𝐒𝐻𝐻𝐬. He informed them that they had done all they could for Izuku. His spine had been stabilized with metal plates and screws, and while he had lost a lot of BLD, the surgeries had been successful. However, the doctor cautioned that it was uncertain how long it would take for Izuku to wake up, as his body had entered a state of hibernation. The heroes collectively sighed in relief. Hisashi inquired about visiting Izuku, and when the doctor confirmed that only the 4 of them could enter, they quickly made their way to his room, with 𝗏𝗏 leading the way. As Izuku soared higher into the sky, he felt a sense of freedom, though he refrained from looking back at 𝗏𝗏, who had followed him. The sleeping pills he had taken began to take effect, and he thought about how this was his only chance to escape. As he drifted off, he transformed back into his human form. Just before losing consciousness, he collided with something and felt a sharp pain in his back. He recognized the fabric wrapping around him as 𝗏𝗏's capture scarf. His last memory was of 𝗏𝗏, who seemed to be singing to him. Izuku wished he could do one last favor for his friends by letting go. When Izuku regained awareness, he found himself in a dark, endless void where he could neither breathe nor see. Suddenly, memories flooded his mind, including a painful encounter with his mother, who had blamed him for a loss and struck him with a bottle. Other memories followed, including a moment from his childhood when he excitedly showed his father his quirk. Hisashi had reacted with anger, belittling Izuku's abilities and causing him to feel the weight of his parents' disappointment. A voice interrupted his recollections, transforming the darkness into an appealing field filled with pale blue roses and spider lilies. As the sun set, the sky exploded with colors. To his right stood a grand mountain adorned with cherry blossom trees, while to his left lay a deep ravine from which faint cries emerged. The voice reassured him that it was not yet his time. Izuku pleaded to remain in this place, fearing the return to his previous life and the confrontation with his mother. The voice, identifying itself as Himoya Okawo, or Mishi, explained that it was the previous owner of his dormant quirk, Vitality. This quirk could give or take life through contact and had the power to heal injuries. Mishi warned him to use it wisely, as it was difficult to ensure. As Mishi departed, Izuku began to hear familiar voices. He focused on the conversation, trying to discern what was happening. 𝗏𝗏 asked about any changes, while a doctor responded that Izuku was only mumbling. The doctor revealed that they had discovered a new quirk within him, one that was incredibly powerful and had not been seen since its previous owner had died young. The quirk, Vitality, could be used to manipulate life and heal injuries, and it was believed to be a myth until now. Both 𝗏𝗏 and Hisashi were taken aback by this revelation, grappling with the implications of such a quirk existing. The doctor continued, explaining that it could be restrained, leaving them in deep thought about the future. Glasses or a visor could be used to prevent someone from being hurt or erased from existence. 𝗏𝗏 mentioned they would discuss more once the boy woke up. However, they were uncertain when that would be. Hisashi noted that they couldn't keep him hidden from his mother for much longer, as she had been searching everywhere. He remarked on her poor acting skills, pretending to care for Izuku. A woman's voice, older and somewhat familiar, stated that all they could do was wait. Izuku couldn't recall her name. Suddenly, a loud declaration of being back with heavens startled him. Was he hallucinating, or was that beach might? He dismissed it as a hallucination and drifted back into a troubled sleep. 4 days later, Izuku woke again, but his eyelids felt incredibly heavy. He heard voices and decided to listen in. 𝗏𝗏 was discussing Izuku Midoriya being in custody, confirming that she had finally been apprehended. The scars and bruises on Izuku's body had warranted her imprisonment for at least 12 years. Hisashi inquired if she knew about Izuku's new quirk, but 𝗏𝗏 quickly assured him that she did not. After another brief sleep, Izuku attempted to open his eyes. Bright light flooded his vision, and the strong scent of cleaning chemicals filled the air. The heart monitor beeped steadily, quickening. As he regained consciousness, he looked around, still dazed from his long slumber, and found the room empty. As the heart monitor's pace increased, memories flooded back to him. The suicide attempt, the sleeping pills, 𝗏𝗏, everything. A small shuffling sound caught his attention, and he turned to see a boy around his age with puffy purple hair sleeping on the floor. Panic surged through Izuku, as he had not had the best experiences with new people. It felt as if the heart monitor was screaming in his ears. He struggled to breathe, tears welling in his eyes as he gasped for air. The purple-haired boy woke up, making eye contact with Izuku. It took a moment for the boy to realize Izuku was awake, and he let out a startled shout before fleeing the room. Almost immediately, 𝗏𝐬𝐬 and Hisashi rushed in to find Izuku in the midst of a panic attack. 𝗏𝐬𝐬 quickly approached him, wrapping his arms around the trembling boy, assuring him that he was there and that Hisashi was too. Chio would be arriving soon with coffee. Izuku gradually calmed down, taking in his surroundings. He quietly asked about his mother's arrest, his voice raspy. 𝗏𝐬𝐬 took a moment to process the question before confirming that she was gone and that Izuku was safe now with them. Grateful, Izuku thanked 𝗏𝐬𝐬, using an unfamiliar honorific. 𝗏𝐬𝐬 blinked in surprise, realizing the boy had never addressed him that way before. Hisashi then interjected, mentioning that there was someone present who might trigger Izuku's emotions but urged him to hear the person out. Izuku looked at Hisashi with uncertainty but agreed. Hisashi left and soon returned with All Might. Izuku froze, quickly masking his shock with a facade of anguish. He confronted All Might, expressing his disdain. All Might took a seat beside him and began to explain his intentions, expressing his regret and how he had vented to the wrong person on a difficult day. Izuku responded with a mix of sarcasm and seriousness, warning All Might never to doubt his potential, suggesting he could turn his outfit into a swarm of spiders or worse. The room fell silent as everyone processed Izuku's words. All Might was taken aback when Izuku used his real name, Yagi. He hesitated, almost revealing more than he intended. Izuku explained that he had overheard a conversation about coffee and connected the dots. 𝗏𝐬𝐬 then excitedly announced that they had a surprise for him, but was interrupted by Shura's quirk. Once the moment passed, he resumed, mentioning they needed to discuss Izuku's new quirk. Izuku acknowledged that he had some control over it, explaining that a girl named Mishi Okawa had merged her soul with his, granting him knowledge of his abilities. He urged them to proceed with the surprise. Hisashi revealed that he and 𝗏𝐬𝐬 had decided to adopt Izuku. Stunned, tears filled Izuku's eyes as he began to cry. 𝗏𝐬𝐬 and Hisashi exchanged worried glances, asking what was wrong. Izuku expressed that no one had ever wanted him before. Hisashi winced at his words and embraced him gently. Izuku thanked them both sincerely, acknowledging that All Might had inspired the idea. He insisted on continuing to call All Might by his less flattering names. Just then, the doctor entered, expressing a message for Okawa, but was interrupted as Izuku's eyes changed to a vibrant purple and green galaxy. He declared his love for his father in a higher tone before his eyes returned to normal, and he fainted. After recovering from the shock of discovering that the adoption was All Might's idea and that Izuku's new quirk involved moments of possession, 𝗏𝐬𝐬, Hisashi, and Izuku stopped by his house to collect some belongings. Izuku worried about being judged for the state of his room, thinking perhaps he could convince them to stay outside. 𝗏𝐬𝐬 reassured him, noting that they wouldn't judge whatever he was concerned about. Izuku hesitated before opening the door to his house, memories of his past flooding back. He felt tears welling up, his throat tightening, and the room seemed to tilt. Just as he began to stumble, 𝗏𝐬𝐬 caught him and instructed Hisashi to lay him down on the couch, suggesting that the memories had overwhelmed the boy. After about 10 minutes, Izuku awoke on the couch, reflecting on how good it felt to escape, even if just for a moment. Hisashi and 𝗏𝐬𝐬 had gone to explore the rest of the house. As Izuku stood up and surveyed his surroundings, he noticed shattered glass bottles scattered across the floor and knives still embedded in the walls. He thought to himself that it was typical of his mother not to clean up after herself. He called out for her, but received no response. 𝗏𝐬𝐬, coming down the stairs, wondered if Izuku had forgotten everything that had happened. The boy sighed from the kitchen, wishing the dream or nightmare had been real, as it would have given him a break. Hisashi, joining 𝗏𝐬𝐬, expressed confusion over Izuku's belief that it was all a dream. They decided to listen a little longer. They overheard Izuku speaking on the home phone, confirming to Jiro that he was okay and had spent the night at his guardian's place. 𝗏𝐬𝐬 and Hisashi exchanged glances, both feeling sympathy for the boy. When they were about to announce their presence, a loud knock interrupted them. Izuku rushed to the door, peeking out before letting in a girl around his age with dark indigo hair and earphone jacks hanging from her earlobes. As Izuku approached her, he asked what she wanted to show him. 𝗟𝐬 hesitated before pulling up an article on her phone about his disappearance and his mother's arrest. He stood frozen, realizing it hadn't all been a dream. 𝗟𝐬 shook her head just as 𝗂𝐬 cleared his throat, startling Izuku, who transformed into a small cat in surprise. Once he changed back, he apologized, expressing his hope for a caring family. 𝗂𝐬 confirmed that they would get his belongings, mentioning that Shinso had already cleared out a spare room. Izuku quickly ran upstairs to gather his few possessions. 𝗟𝐬 stood awkwardly in the kitchen, feeling protective of Izuku and warning the adults not to hurt him. The two heroes were taken aback by her fierce declaration, but she soon followed Izuku upstairs. In his room, Izuku asked 𝗟𝐬 if it was normal to feel scared. She reassured him that it was, and they all had his back. He mentioned missing their friends, Himiko Toga and 𝗟𝗶𝐻, and 𝗟𝐬 suggested they could meet up with them that night. Izuku was excited at the prospect of reuniting with his friends and agreed to the plan. As 𝗟𝐬 left him to finish packing, Izuku contemplated hiding his new quirk for now. Unbeknownst to them, 𝗂𝐬 had been listening to their conversation and felt that Izuku was keeping something from them. He quickly returned to Hisashi, expressing his concerns about the boys' secret plans with 𝗟𝐬. Moments later, 𝗟𝐬 and Izuku came downstairs, ready to leave. Izuku sensed that the adults were aware of something he hadn't shared. Just then, 𝗂𝐬 playfully whacked the back of his head for mumbling, prompting Izuku to react in surprise. 𝗂𝐬 suggested they could be called 𝗟𝗓𝗧 and 𝗂𝗶𝗸, leaving Izuku embarrassed. Upon arriving at the house, a purple-haired boy rushed down the stairs, excitedly asking if Izuku was there. Hisashi stepped aside to reveal the shy boy, and the two exclaimed in joy, with one transforming into a tiny kitten. 𝗂𝐬, filled with affection, gently cradled the kitten, reminding Shinso not to scare the new arrival. Shinso expressed his excitement about having a new friend, and as if on cue, several cats rushed into the room. Izuku was introduced to the various cats, each with their own unique names and personalities. He let out a startled cry, questioning what he was seeing. Someone pointed out that it was just Cory, a cat. He made a mental note to avoid any trouble with that feline. Suddenly, he recalled that he had a meeting at the park in an hour and asked where his room was. He was told to follow, and with a sigh, he decided to go along. At 8:45, he quickly dressed in a black jacket, gray skinny ripped jeans, and red high tops, grabbing one of his masks and a small drawstring bag. He slid open the window, hopped out, and raced down the street toward the park. Time was running short, and he glanced back to ensure no one was following him before shifting into a gazelle. He finally arrived at the park with just 3 minutes to spare, breathing as he took a seat on the swings. He was suddenly startled by the sound of familiar voices approaching. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 and Toga were running toward him, with 𝗟𝐬 following behind. He felt a genuine smile spread across his face as he greeted them, recalling how long it had been since he had taken on the persona of the 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐽. After 30 minutes, they began discussing their next target. One of them suggested a location with plenty of people to collect from, while another chimed in with a suggestion of their own. Zook, slightly raising his voice, decided they would hit both places and instructed everyone to get ready. They dispersed behind trees and bushes to change into their villain attire. 𝗟𝐬 donned a teal and black jacket with speakers, black bass-boosted boots, and a unique wrist device. Toga's outfit was well known among them. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 wore a black trench coat with white stitching and metal cuffs, paired with a white t-shirt and black jeans. Izuku sported a BLD red button-up shirt, a black suit vest, and black combat boots, wielding a soul scythe crafted from his new quirk, Vitality. The scythe, made from the life force of those taken, had a silver and black blade adorned with feathers. Unbeknownst to the teens, 𝗂𝐬 and Hisashi were observing from a nearby tree. 𝗂𝐬 wondered why the 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐽 sounded familiar, while Hisashi speculated about their villainous activities. They decided to follow the group quietly. As they prepared for their mission, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 complimented Izuku on his new scythe. With a swift transformation, Izuku became an ant and scurried under the back door of their target house. Once inside, he ensured the coast was clear before returning to his human form and unlocking the door for his friends. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 and Toga began their chaotic work, causing a ruckus that woke the occupants, who found themselves trapped by a chair blocking their door. Meanwhile, Jiro and Izuku collected anything of value, including jewelry, collector's items, and a briefcase with a lock. After wreaking havoc, the group fled the house, laughter echoing behind them. Hisashi, horrified by what he witnessed, urged 𝐿𝐸 to intervene. They decided to call for help. 5 minutes later, the group reconvened at the park, excitedly examining their spoils. Izuku distributed the loot, allowing 𝗟𝗶𝐻 and Jiro to take what they wanted, while he handed Toga a selection of knives, keeping one that bore an ominous inscription for himself. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 asked if he could melt the lock on the briefcase, and Izuku agreed. In moments, the lock was gone, revealing $8,000 and a set of tonto blades, along with a note. As Izuku read the note, his expression changed. It was a message from his father, expressing pride in his son's choices and hinting at a future meeting. Feeling a wave of anxiety, Izuku gathered his belongings and mumbled his goodbyes before rushing off, accidentally leaving the note behind. As he entered through his window, he was met by 𝐿𝐸, and a sense of dread washed over him. He realized he was in serious trouble. Izuku froze halfway in the bedroom, a sense of dread washing over him. He wondered if 𝐿𝐸 had figured it out. He forced a nervous smile and rubbed the back of his neck, greeting 𝐿𝐸. 𝐿𝐸 cut straight to the point, stating that Izuku's friends were being booked at the station. He insisted they needed to talk and began to drag Izuku down the stairs, the familiar scarf tightening around him. Izuku realized he was still in his 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐽 outfit, and he feared what Hisashi might think. Hisashi was waiting in the living room alongside Detective 𝐿𝐸 Tsukachi, Chiyo, Nemuri, 𝐿𝐶𝐿, and 𝗀𝐿, who lurked in the background, eager for some gossip. 𝐿𝐸 greeted Izuku with a grim expression, and Izuku felt a wave of relief that he had managed to shrink his scythe to a pin size and conceal it in his pocket. 𝐿𝐸 demanded that Izuku take a seat and explain himself. Izuku responded with a teasing remark, which earned him a glare from the adults. As he sat down, 𝐿𝐸 began his questioning, offering Izuku a choice between discussing things there or at the station, where the atmosphere would be more intense. Izuku chose to stay, but warned that he would not answer some questions. 𝐿𝐸 pressed on, asking about Izuku's ambitions. Izuku admitted he was currently a vigilante, bordering on villain. When asked about his friends, he named Jiro, 𝗟𝗶𝐻, and Toga, challenging 𝐿𝐸 to figure them out. The detective inquired about Izuku's alias, prompting Izuku to look up with a mischievous glint in his eyes. He requested to stand and access his pocket, and after a moment's hesitation, 𝐿𝐸 allowed it. Feeling more comfortable, Izuku decided to step into the backyard to avoid any accidents. He chuckled darkly, sensing a shift in his demeanor. Hisashi and the others exchanged worried glances as Izuku reached for a pin in his vest pocket. He mumbled a chant in Norse and threw the pin into the air, which transformed into a massive scythe that landed in his outstretched hand. With a powerful voice, he declared himself the 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐽. Izuku's eyes shifted to a vibrant purple and green galaxy, and he introduced himself as a fragment of 𝐒𝐮𝐲𝐽 Okawa's soul. He expressed regret for Izuku's actions, explaining that Izuku was in immense pain and loneliness, with even his closest friends unaware of his struggles. He warned that he would reveal a glimpse of Izuku's past before departing, and with that, Izuku's eyes returned to green, and he collapsed. The others, including Chiyo, Nemuri, All Might, 𝐿𝐸, Hisashi, and 𝐿𝐸, finally got a good look at Izuku's temporary eye color, which glowed brightly against the dark night. As Izuku fell to the ground, the scythe reverted to its pin-sized form. 𝐿𝐸 approached cautiously, but 𝐿𝐸 stopped him, insisting on taking Izuku to the station. Nemuri interrupted, demanding an explanation for the bizarre events they had just witnessed. The adults exchanged uncertain looks before Hisashi lifted the unconscious boy and carried him to the couch, asking 𝗀𝐿 to fetch something to cover Izuku's eyes. 𝗀𝐿 grumbled as he retrieved a cloth from the cabinet and handed it to Hisashi. Hisashi explained that while Izuku had been in a coma, he was chosen as the successor for a powerful quirk called Vitality, which allowed him to manipulate life force. The previous owner had left a trace of her soul to guide a worthy successor, and she had chosen Izuku. The revelation shocked everyone in the room, especially at the mention of the Crimson Reaper, a name associated with both fear and heroism. As they processed this information, a groan from the couch drew their attention. Izuku's body flickered, and Hisashi expressed concern. Nomuri, ever the dramatist, reacted with alarm. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 warned them that Izuku was having a nightmare, and they should back away. They watched as Izuku transformed into a younger version of himself, appearing around 8 years old, visibly frail. The onlookers felt a chill as they witnessed his chest burn and his eyes roll back in his head. Suddenly, they were transported into a memory. A silhouette of a girl appeared, instructing them to remain quiet as they watched Izuku relive painful memories. She warned them that she would explain later, but for now, they had to observe in silence. Izuku's younger self cried out in distress, apologizing repeatedly. "Please don't hurt me," Izuku thought as he saw a tall, muscular man with wild black curls approach him, his expression filled with anger. The man held up a small notebook, demanding to know if this was the homework Izuku had completed. The boy nodded timidly, fear evident in his eyes. The man continued, expressing his disappointment in Izuku and suggesting that he didn't deserve a father as forgiving as him. Cowering on the ground, Izuku couldn't bring himself to meet the man's gaze, whispering an apology and begging for forgiveness. The man let out a dark chuckle, warning Izuku that he would never escape him and to not attempt to defy him again. Izuku nodded obediently, and the man instructed him to turn around. As Izuku faced away, the man's chest swelled, and a dark energy surged forth, engulfing Izuku's back in flames. The haunting screams echoed in the minds of those who witnessed the scene. Naomasa turned pale, Hisashi looked ready to be sick, while Nomuri and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 shed silent tears, trembling at the sight. All Might wore a look of horror, and 𝗟𝗟 and 𝐾𝐿 could no longer bear to watch, prompting 𝐿𝐼𝐬 to allow them to exit the dreamscape. 𝐿𝐼𝐬 paused the memory, asking if they were ready for another. The group's expressions reflected their dread, but 𝐒𝐮𝐬 spoke up, expressing his longing to support Izuku, especially after adopting him. He wanted to be a true friend. The others nodded in agreement, and 𝐿𝐼𝐬 presented a holographic display filled with memories, allowing each of them to select one. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 chose a memory from the previous year. Hisashi selected one featuring his Reaper persona, while Nomuri and All Might picked memories from the schoolyard. Naomasa opted for a memory that included a masked figure. As the next memory began, 𝐼𝐻 rushed toward Izuku, who greeted her quietly without turning around. She immediately sensed that something was wrong and asked if he had been bullied again. Izuku confirmed her fears, and 𝐼𝐻 insisted on seeing the damage. When he turned to face her, tears welled in his eyes, revealing a gash on his forehead, burn marks on his chest, and a black eye. 𝐼𝐻 took his hand, determined to help him, but Izuku resisted, feeling like a burden. He expressed his despair, believing that no one cared about him, and pulled away, leaving 𝐼𝐻 in tears. Hisashi and 𝐒𝐮𝐬 felt a pang of guilt, realizing their role in Izuku's pain. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 regretted his words, a realization that would take years for Izuku to fully understand. All Might remained silent, knowing he was no better, while Nomuri stood by, tears streaming down her face. 𝐿𝐼𝐬 paused the memory again and asked who would go next. All Might suggested the memory he had chosen, and 𝐿𝐼𝐬 grimly noted that Nomuri's memory would need to come first for context. Nomuri wiped her tears and prepared to share her memory. In her memory, Izuku sat in the back of an alley, wearing his middle school uniform and writing in a notebook. A boy, a year or two older, approached him, taunting him about his diary. Izuku didn't respond, seemingly lost in his music. The boy yanked out his earbuds, demanding his attention and belittling him. Izuku meekly acknowledged him, but the boy continued to insult him, throwing him to the ground and delivering harsh words and blows. After a few moments, the boy left, and Izuku struggled to gather his belongings and stand. 𝐿𝐼𝐬 transitioned to All Might's memory, where Izuku was walking down the street, heading to 𝗟𝗓's house to address his injuries. He accidentally bumped into a man in a black trench coat, who turned out to be one of Izuku's allies, 𝗟𝗶H. 𝗟𝗶H checked on him and offered his number, encouraging Izuku to reach out if he needed someone to talk to. As Izuku approached 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and Hisashi's home, he overheard a heated argument through an open window. 𝐒𝐮𝐲 insisted that Izuku shouldn't keep coming over, while Hisashi argued that the boy needed support. The tension escalated, and Izuku felt overwhelmed, wanting nothing more than for someone to care about him. 𝐒𝐮𝐲, reflecting on that day, felt deep regret for his actions while he was intoxicated. He remembered the moment vividly, realizing the impact of his words and actions. As the dreamscape froze, he broke down in tears, and Hisashi comforted him, assuring him that they would face their challenges together as a family. Hisashi also recalled that day with clarity, knowing it marked a turning point for both him and 𝐒𝐮𝐲. He would never forget the sight of Izuku running away, a memory that would stay with him forever. He recalls driving down the street in the truck, passing by Izuku, whose face was streaked with tears. He watched as Izuku transformed into a snake and vanished into the grass. They all wished that day could be forgotten. Hisashi approached Okawo, expressing a longing to erase that memory. She confirmed that it was possible, though it might leave Izuku disoriented if anything related to it was mentioned. After a brief incantation in a forgotten language, the memory disintegrated. Nemuri, still sniffling, inquired about the toll it took on Okawo's soul. She explained that it only wore her out when using Izuku's physical form, not when she was within his mind. 𝐿𝐼𝐻𝐸 was called upon next. Izuku found himself walking through an alleyway in Yuzurifu. He approached a reinforced door and knocked twice. A small sliding window opened, and a gruff male voice demanded his name and purpose. He introduced himself as 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽, mentioning a meeting with Shiggy and the big man. Inside, he was immediately tackled into a hug by Toga, a blonde girl they recognized. Izuku responded with a swift kick, sending her flying, and harshly reminded her that his name was Kuzu. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 greeted him with a friendly embrace, indicating that Shiggy was waiting for him. They moved behind the bar and entered a portal, where a masked man sat behind a desk. The man greeted Izuku as young Kuzu and invited him to take a seat. As Izuku settled in, a blue-haired young man expressed concern about Izuku's presence, claiming he posed an extreme risk as the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽. Izuku, irritated, reminded the young man of his presence. Shigaraki urged calm, explaining that Izuku was there to negotiate a truce. Izuku leaned back in his chair, smirking as he proposed a deal. He would take 2 partners and spare the lives of the League. All for one reluctantly agreed, allowing Izuku to leave with 2 people, but only if he returned in need, not for leisure. Izuku thanked him with a psychotic smile before returning to the bar, where he called for anyone interested in joining him. Toga, 𝗟𝗶𝐻, a lizard man, a person in a black and white bodysuit, and a person with large lips emerged from their rooms. The lizard man, visibly annoyed, questioned why Izuku was waking them up at such an hour. Izuku turned sharply to him, asking if he wanted to repeat that. The tension escalated quickly, and in an instant, Izuku was behind the lizard man, his sickles poised threateningly. Another member of the group demanded to know who Izuku thought he was, barging in and threatening Spinner. Izuku chuckled darkly, reminding them of his identity as Kuzu, better known as the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽. He made his intentions clear, warning them that he was there for 2 associates in exchange for their lives. Toga eagerly volunteered, excited to be with Izuku, but he quickly silenced her with a stern warning. Izuku then offered to choose someone at random if no one else stepped forward. He was still frustrated that Shiggy and �ґ were off limits, wishing he could revert 𝗁 back to his human form. While he pondered this, 𝗟𝗶𝐻 approached and hugged him, confirming he would be the second partner. Izuku bid farewell to the others, instructing them to stay out of trouble and handing them money for their stay. The scene shifted to a park where the heroes later caught up with them. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 had already caused significant destruction, and Izuku offered him advice on controlling his powers. Toga, however, had already caused chaos, and Izuku reprimanded her for drawing attention to them. He warned them to keep a low profile, emphasizing the seriousness of their situation before vanishing in an instant. Okawo paused the dreamscape, revealing her ability to sense Izuku's mental struggles. She believed he was dealing with psychosis and bipolar disorder, which explained his erratic behavior. The 4 heroes exchanged confused glances, And All Might broke the silence by noting that Izuku's connection to All for One was significant. Okawa explained her age and experience, prompting All Might to apologize for his earlier assumptions. She then prepared them for the final memory, hinting at its disturbing nature. The group nodded in agreement, ready to witness what lay ahead. Izuku had just returned home from school, setting his bag down when he felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. He recognized the threat without making a sound. His mother welcomed him home with hostility, demanding to know about his test results. Trembling with fear and pain, he retrieved a paper from his backpack and handed it to her, bracing for her reaction. His mother questioned him in a dark tone, expressing her disappointment over his grade of 74. She believed she had raised him better and felt he was ungrateful. Izuku, trembling, pleaded for mercy, promising to improve as she pulled him by his hair toward the basement. She warned him to study while he was down there and pushed him into the dark space, leaving him alone with his backpack. 3 days later, the basement door finally opened. Izuku emerged, shaky from hunger and thirst, only to find his mother was not home. The first thing he did was drink several glasses of water and eat a small plate of grilled fish. He contemplated letting the voices in his head take over, feeling that it might ruin the little life he had left. After trudging upstairs, he packed a neatly folded outfit into a drawstring bag, along with 2 sickles and several pocket knives. He headed to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and let it warm up. As he removed his shirt and sweatpants, the scars and burn marks on his body became visible. Once in the shower, he broke down in tears, pleading for the voices to leave him alone, expressing his desperation. After a moment of struggle, he grabbed a razor from the shelf, hesitating before using it to make small cuts on his arm. He sighed, realizing he was going to be late for his own birthday party. Quickly, he dried off, put on a hoodie vest, gray joggers, and sneakers, then grabbed his bag and jumped out of his window. While running down the street, he transformed into a cougar and took a shortcut through the woods. Soon, he arrived at the familiar park where 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸, Toga, and Jiro were waiting for him. They greeted him with enthusiastic birthday wishes, and he managed a soft smile in response. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸, visibly upset, asked if his mother had mistreated him again. Izuku nodded, assuring them that it would all be over soon. He forced a smile and played a fitting song for their gathering. Jiro, catching her breath, agreed with the choice, and Toga laughed joyfully. Curious about his gifts, Izuku asked what his friends had brought him for his special day. Toga eagerly urged him to open her presents first, pushing 2 sleek boxes into his arms. As he opened them, he gasped in delight at the sight of 2 red and black knife sets, expressing his gratitude with a heartfelt hug for Toga. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 and Jiro approached Izuku, carrying a sizable box and a couple of bags. Jiro instructed him to open the bags first. As Izuku opened them, he revealed 3 sets of black suit vests, BLD red Oxford shirts, and stylish black jeans. A wicked smile spread across his face as he expressed gratitude, excited that their idea was coming to fruition. With a deep breath, he declared himself the Crimson Reaper and his friends as the Fates. They all cheered and laughed, reveling in their new identities. Jiro then tossed the larger box to Izuku, urging him to open it. As Izuku tore it open, he discovered the latest model of an American military sniper rifle, the 𝐒𝐮𝐩𝐩𝐸 precision sniper rifle. His eyes widened in disbelief as he exclaimed how they managed to find it. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸, with a deadpan expression, simply stated they had their sources. Accepting their secrecy, Izuku took the rifle out, calibrated the scope, and loaded a few rounds, asking who was ready to go hunting. Moments later, they found themselves on a rooftop in 𝗏𝗡𝗏 City, close to the League of Villains base. Jiro's voice crackled through the comms, informing Izuku that Spinner was coming out with Shigaraki for a smoke. Izuku quickly set up the sniper, aiming for Spinner's leg, determined that the wannabe Ninja Turtle would not bother him again. He pulled the trigger, but his aim faltered, and he accidentally hit Spinner's elbow instead. Realizing the mistake, he urged his friends to leave as they leaped off the rooftop, escaping Spinner's cries. Later that night, Toga encountered a man on a rooftop. He had long black hair and wore a black bodysuit, with a gray belt and scarf. He stood perilously close to the edge. Although the group had a reputation for violence, they considered themselves vigilantes, not villains. Toga approached him gently, expressing concern for his safety. The man turned to her, capturing her with his scarf before releasing her. He introduced himself as 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and questioned why she was out so late. Toga explained she was with friends, warning him to watch his step. Suddenly, Izuku appeared, throwing a knife attached to a retractable string into 𝗟𝗓's calf as a form of payback. He taunted 𝗟𝗓𝐬, reminding him of their past encounter before introducing himself and his friends as the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷 and the Fates. The memory abruptly shifted, leaving Okawo observing the scene. Nemuri trembled, tears streaming down her face as she processed the memory's conclusion. Hisashi had fainted at the sight of Spinner getting shot, while All Might grimaced, reflecting on the times he could have saved Izuku but failed. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷 was in a corner, feeling unwell, and 𝗟𝗓𝐬 was on the ground, hyperventilating and crying. Throughout the memories, Okawo had enabled them to experience the world through Izuku's eyes, feeling his emotions. A singular thought resonated among them. How could that boy smile despite everything he had endured? He managed to smile through the pain. Okawo was a girl who had sacrificed herself using her quirk to prevent 𝗟𝗋ₛ from acquiring it, ultimately saving countless lives. After her death, a piece of her soul remained with the quirk, and she spent a century searching for the right person to pass it on to. She found Izuku while he was in a coma, granting him the quirk and merging her soul with his mind to help him control it. Upon waking, she could temporarily take control of his body, using his stamina, but only if he allowed it. Dr. Himoya, Okawo's father, possessed a quirk called age gap, which prevented him from aging for extended periods. After leaving the operating room where Izuku was treated, he appeared to be around 70, though he was nearly 300 years old. It would later be revealed that he was the first person to possess a quirk, though his was acquired through experimentation. In the next chapter, Okawo would reveal her true form, the one she had in life, along with her soul form. Although she was bound to her outfit in death, her wounds were all healed. Okawo sent the remaining heroes out of the dream space, allowing them to awaken. Chiyo and ♯♯ had somewhat recovered from their harrowing experience while waiting for the others to regain consciousness. Izuku's body was undergoing transformations with every injury he sustained, manifesting as bruises or burns. They realized that the memory they had experienced lasted only 5 minutes in the real world. About 30 minutes later, Hisashi began to stir. His eyes opened, and he looked at Izuku with a mixture of horror and concern. As soon as he realized he was back in reality, he rushed to the nearest trash can to empty his stomach. ♯♯ quietly inquired about Hisashi's well-being, expressing his concern. Hisashi urged them to promise that if they ever ventured into Izuku's memories again and sensed something wrong, they would leave immediately. He was baffled by how Izuku managed to smile after everything he had endured. Hisashi was abruptly interrupted by 𝗟𝗓𝐬, who pushed him aside as 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷 dashed to the bathroom. The once quiet house was now filled with the sounds of retching and quiet sobs. Nemuri cradled Izuku in her arms while All Might knelt beside her, offering comforting gestures. 𝗟𝗓𝐬 whispered about how much Izuku needed their support now more than ever. All Might nodded in agreement, and Nemuri's sobs grew louder, lamenting that he was too young for such burdens. Hisashi suggested that Chiyo contact Nizu, believing he could help clear Izuku's record of any charges, insisting that he did not deserve this at such a young age. Chiyo went upstairs to call Nizu, assuring him that she was okay but needed him to come over. After the call, she returned downstairs to inform the others that Nizu was on his way. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Nemuri, having calmed down considerably but still looking distressed, opened the door to find Nizu standing there, shock evident on his usually composed face. He wondered why they were all gathered there, especially 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷. 𝗟𝗓𝐬𝐬, not in the mood for pleasantries, snapped at Nizu to follow him, leaving the principal bewildered. When the 3 adults returned to the living room, they found Izuku awake and backed into a corner, visibly frightened and demanding to know what was happening and who they were. The adults exchanged worried glances. Chiyo approached the terrified boy gently, asking him what the last thing he remembered was. Izuku stammered about being in an alley when a man had approached him, saying that a pretty boy like him shouldn't be alone at night. Hisashi and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 exchanged knowing looks, recalling their first encounter with Izuku. However, when he mentioned pretty boy, the adults were struck with concern. Izuku seemed to be speaking to himself, mentioning 𝐼𝐻𝐬 and expressing confusion before everyone present relaxed slightly, understanding the situation. Nizu, however, was still in the dark and requested an explanation. 𝐼𝐻𝐬, recognizing the need for clarity, invited 𝗟𝗚𝐽 to join them. As Izuku fell to the ground, clutching his head, 𝗟𝗚𝐽 brought a trash can with him, apologizing for his discomfort. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 began to recount everything he knew about Izuku and the circumstances surrounding him, including the concept of vitality. By the time 𝐼𝐻𝐬 finished, 𝗟𝗚𝐽 was feeling unwell again, haunted by the memories of Izuku's past. Nizu appeared horrified and displeased. A soft knock interrupted them, and Nemuri entered, announcing that Izuku was awake and remembered everything this time before leaving again. Nizu, determined to meet the boy, led the way to the couch where Izuku sat, his face stained with tears. Hisashi and 𝐼𝐻𝐬 were on either side of him, offering comfort. Nizu introduced himself as the principal of 𝐼𝐻𝐬 and expressed his longing to offer Izuku a chance to join the hero course, despite the school year already having begun. He believed Izuku would be an excellent addition and wanted to provide him with the opportunity he had never received. Hearing this, Izuku realized how much he needed to hear such words. However, he hesitated, voicing concerns about his quirks and the necessity of a special visor to nullify them. His thoughts were interrupted as his eyes shifted to a galaxy like 𝐻𝐬, leaving Nizu visibly shocked. Suddenly, a voice introduced itself as 𝐼𝐻𝐬, explaining that Izuku could hear everything being said and urging them to stay until he regained enough energy to let 𝐼𝐻𝐬 out. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 advised them to cover Izuku's eyes with a cloth before retreating, causing Izuku to slump over. The following afternoon, everyone was awake by 2 p.m., with Izuku being the last to rise. 𝐼𝐻𝐬, still worried, asked if Izuku was sure he could handle what was to come. Izuku reassured him, albeit uncertainly, and instructed everyone to step back. As his eyes flickered to the galaxy, he began to chant in a language unfamiliar to the others before letting out a scream. A white fog emanated from his chest, taking on a human shape beside him. When the fog settled, it revealed a appealing young girl with long flowing white hair, pale skin, and a flowing white dress adorned with a choker and a crown-like headpiece made of 2 shades of silver. Her pale purple eyes sparkled with life. The girl introduced herself as 𝐼𝐻𝐬, explaining that she had regained her original form and would now follow Izuku everywhere to ensure his well-being. She acknowledged that she needed to change into a more suitable outfit for her new role. As 𝐼𝐻𝐬 raised her hands and transformed her attire into something resembling a hero costume, 𝐼𝐻𝐬 thought to himself about how much she could talk. It was a thin white sleeveless top with a high neck, reaching down to her knees in both the front and back. The sides cut off at the hip. She wore white fingerless gloves that extended slightly above her elbows. As for breaths, she had none. It resembled the bottom half of a bathing suit, but her top concealed it. 𝐼𝐻𝐬's boots were also white, featuring black soles, and they rose to mid-thigh. On her head, she sported a crown-like headpiece made of small beads, adorned with a pendant that hung in the front. A sheer pale purple and blue cloth draped from her hips. The onlookers watched in awe as she moved her hands, gliding up her thighs and forming an upside-down pyramid shape on her back. Suddenly, 3 long, sharp swords materialized, one on each thigh and one across her back. Izuku found identical replicas appearing in his hands. She captured his attention, stating that the dramatic display was over and asked him for a new name. She explained that she was now in a physical form, not a soul state, and if someone recognized her name, it could put him in danger. Izuku glanced at the adults around him, who looked just as confused. He suggested the name Kiri, which she accepted. She instructed everyone to leave, promising to answer their questions later, as she needed to prepare Izuku's new appearance. The group protested, settling down on 𝐻𝐬 and Mick's back porch. Kiri sighed and asked Izuku if he was single. He was taken aback by the question, confirming that he was. Ignoring his confusion, Kiri hummed and inquired about his orientation, claiming her instincts were telling her something. He admitted he was bisexual. Kiri informed him that his new look would come with a side effect, a surge of confidence, though she admitted she didn't fully understand it herself. Izuku's new appearance included pierced ears, black combat boots adorned with chains, and 2 dark purple and pink crystalline horns floating above his forehead. The heroes observing were astonished by his transformation. He positioned his swords on his thighs and across his back. A year later, the time had finally arrived for Izuku to join Heroics Class 2A. It had taken him nearly a year to master both of his quirks. He had discovered new ways to utilize his alteration quirk and could now control vitality freely. He had moved past his villainous tendencies and was now a vigilante, awaiting his provisional license. Izuku accepted Nizu's offer to join the Heroics class, set to start the next day. Nizu provided him with a special pass to carry his swords and remain in his combat outfit, and he insisted that Kiri accompany Izuku. The duo earned the nickname, the Hunters, within the local hero community for their efforts in taking down minor villains for practice. Izuku's confidence had soared. He had become the embodiment of a badass. His swordsmanship and martial arts skills were exceptional, making him nearly unstoppable with Kiri as his mentor. He sparred daily with various heroes, still striving to defeat All Might and 𝐼𝐻𝐬. During his sparring sessions with 𝐼𝐻𝐬, who fought without his quirk, Izuku consistently found himself outmatched. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 checked off a list, asking if Izuku had everything he needed for the following day: his pass, keycard, swords, and so on. Izuku confirmed with an excited smile, reflecting on how much he had improved over the year. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 pondered if this was a sign of pride while Izuku slid down the stair railing. ♯NSO greeted him with a soft smile, and Izuku asked if he had kept tomorrow's plans a secret, eager to see Katsuki's reaction. ♯NSO assured him he hadn't told anyone but mentioned that Shoto seemed to miss him. Izuku had met Shoto during a patrol 6 months prior, saving him from a villain with a drill quirk. Afterward, Shoto had shared his number, and they had been in touch daily, eventually starting to date a month later. Izuku smirked, acknowledging that there was plenty to miss. He winked and headed to the kitchen, leaving ♯NSO flustered. He decided to call Shoto. After exchanging sweet words and making plans to meet at their usual spot, Izuku hung up, eagerly anticipating their reunion. However, he was interrupted by ♯NSO, who teased him about his thoughts. Izuku dismissed the comment, insisting he was not distracted, but ♯NSO pointed out otherwise. Izuku retorted, claiming he could get a date, which elicited a dramatic pout from ♯NSO. Mike entered the kitchen, causing Izuku's face to flush as he dashed to his room, hearing laughter from Mike and ♯NSO behind him. He quickly changed into his nightwear and fell asleep, trying to forget his earlier embarrassment. The next day, Izuku's alarm rang at 4:30 a.m. as usual, prompting him to begin his hour-long workout. His routine included a 3-mile run, 50 push-ups, 50 sit-ups, 50 leg raises, and 50 pull-ups. Afterward, he grabbed a muffin and some bacon before rushing upstairs to don his combat outfit. When he came downstairs, Kiri awaited him, accompanied by Mike, ♯NSO, and 𝐼𝐻𝐬. Kiri asked if he was ready, to which he responded affirmatively. In public, he took on a soldier-like demeanor with Kiri, unless they were joking around. Mike enthusiastically shouted, while 𝐼𝐻𝐬 lamented the early hour, claiming he needed coffee. ♯NSO pointed out they had 30 minutes before leaving. Izuku, feeling energetic, decided to go for a quick run, inviting Kiri along. Izuku reassured his father that he would return soon as he and Kiri stepped out of the doorway. Hisashi remarked to 𝐼𝐻𝐬 that Kiri had become much more relaxed. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 agreed, noting that her newfound ability to communicate had made her realize how frustrating people could be, though he quickly added that he still loved them. This prompted laughter from ♯NSO and Hisashi, who acknowledged the truth in Shoto's words. Izuku returned right on time, and everyone emerged from the building. ♯NSO playfully asked if Izuku was ready for action. Izuku enthusiastically expressed his excitement about seeing his boyfriend, Katsuki, and how amusing it would be to see Katsuki's reaction to his return. The family shared a laugh as they piled into their large truck for the drive to school. Having teachers as parents meant arriving at school earlier than others, but Izuku didn't mind. It allowed him to hit the gym before the first years flooded in. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 attempted to call out to Izuku calmly, but 𝗟𝐿 decided to shout instead, startling Izuku. After regaining his composure, Izuku realized they had arrived. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 and 𝗟𝐿 sighed, while Hisashi chuckled. Izuku asked 𝗟𝐿 if he wanted to join him at the gym, and 𝗟𝐿 agreed, noting their shared class schedule. An hour later, first-year students began to trickle into the gym, mostly boys with a few girls. Izuku overheard some of them commenting on the newcomers, and Kiri expressed her frustration, suggesting they should take action. 𝗟𝐿 had stepped away for a moment, leaving Izuku to handle the situation. Standing tall at 6 feet 2 inches and weighing 180 pounds of lean muscle, Izuku approached the group of first years and issued a challenge. If they could defeat him, they could have Kiri for a week. The first-year boys eagerly accepted the challenge, while Kiri laughed, confident in Izuku's abilities. Izuku had just challenged the first-year students when 𝗟𝐿 returned and learned about the situation, joining in the laughter. A bold first-year stepped forward, claiming he could easily defeat Izuku. Izuku humorously wondered if the boy was related to Katsuki and warned him not to use quirks, as his own could be quite formidable. The first year, 𝗟𝗏, accepted the terms, and they prepared to fight. Izuku instructed the other students to move to the edges of the gym and promised to take it easy on 𝗟𝗏, with the loser being the first to admit defeat. 𝗟𝗏 charged at Izuku, who effortlessly dodged him, teasing that he was too slow. 𝗟𝗏 attempted to pin Izuku down, but Izuku quickly turned the tables, sending 𝗟𝗏 flying with a swift kick. Just then, Aizawa appeared at the door, clearly displeased and reminding Izuku that class had started. Izuku quickly remembered he needed to address his parents formally while at school. He defended himself, explaining that the first years were getting overly confident. Aizawa instructed the 3 boys to gather their things and follow him into the classroom. Once inside, Aizawa had Izuku wait outside with Kiri. Izuku asked Kiri if he could defend her honor if anyone looked at her the wrong way, explaining that she was like a little sister to him. Kiri agreed, but reminded him to be careful. When Aizawa called them in, he introduced the transfer student, and Izuku entered with a confident smile, his crystalline horns glowing. He quickly spotted his boyfriend, 𝗏𝗏, who was eagerly awaiting his arrival. 𝗏𝗏 leaped over the other students to embrace Izuku, expressing how much he had missed him and complimenting his outfit. Izuku returned the hug and kissed 𝗏𝗏, declaring that they would be together every day now. Aizawa interrupted, reminding them to introduce themselves or he would do it for them, and warned the class to use the PRD to get to know the new student. Izuku introduced himself, mentioning his age and that he was adopted by Aizawa. He playfully stated that no one was allowed to touch Kiri, who would introduce herself next. Kiri bowed slightly and warned the class that she would not hesitate to protect Izuku if anyone tried to harm him. Izuku clarified that they were not all dating and that Kiri was more like a bodyguard and mentor. A tall boy with glasses raised his hand, questioning why they were not in the proper uniform and why they had weapons. Izuku simply flicked a copy of his pass at the boy, dismissing him. When several hands shot up, Katsuki, surprisingly calm, raised his hand as well. Izuku greeted him with a smirk, and Katsuki expressed his disbelief that Izuku was alive, apologizing for doubting him. He looked genuinely emotional, as if on the verge of tears. Izuku had forgiven Katsuki long ago. If it weren't for Katsuki's words urging him to take a leap, he would never have found his new parents or the people who genuinely cared for him. Kiri would not have discovered him, and he would not have been blessed with his new quirk. He looked at Katsuki, who appeared deeply remorseful. A red-haired student commented that Katsuki's behavior was far from manly. Izuku decided to test the waters with a playful jab, calling Katsuki an oversized Bomberanian. The only response he received was a warm hug from the blonde, who had risen from his desk to embrace him. However, the moment was interrupted when Kiri, visibly furious, grabbed Katsuki by his hair and pointed the tip of her sword at his neck. Katsuki trembled, feeling the intimidation of the towering warrior girl beside Izuku. Izuku chuckled, reassuring Kiri that it was all right. Without Katsuki's comment, he would still be the weak person he once was. The class gasped, and several hands shot up in the air, while Shoto struggled to contain his laughter. Kiri, now calm, stood ready to respond to the questions. Izuku called on a student who had a question for Kiri. The grape-haired boy's inquiry caused several girls to gasp and a few boys to freeze. Surely he had heard the warnings from Izuku and Kiri, right? After she sheathed her sword, Kiri asked what the boy wanted. His question was inappropriate, and the room fell silent, the tension palpable. Even Aizawa, who had been waking up, held his breath, not wanting to be involved. Izuku, sensing the shift in mood, instructed Shoto to take him and the boy to an arena, preferably one that could withstand a lot. The atmosphere had shifted from humor to seriousness, with half the class trembling and Kiri radiating anger. Izuku was in a dangerous mood. Shoto led everyone to ground beta, where he laid down the rules. Quirks were allowed, and he would not use his blades. If the boy were to perish, it was not Shoto's concern. The boy, Mineta, seemed unfazed, fixated on his goal. Izuku gave Mineta 5 minutes to set up his traps. After the time was up, he entered the arena, his voice booming with confidence. He noticed purple balls scattered across the ground and realized they were part of Mineta's quirk. Curious, he poked one, only to find his finger stuck to it. Using his vitality quirk, he rewound the ball, feeling a sense of superiority. With a playful tone, Izuku called out to Mineta, who was hiding among the buildings. Mineta giggled to himself, believing he was safe. Izuku approached, teasing him about his lack of stealth. Mineta, in a panic, threatened to use his special move. Izuku, unfazed, encouraged him to try. Mineta unleashed a barrage of ball from a contraption on his wrist, but they vanished before reaching Izuku. With a calm demeanor, Izuku placed a finger on Mineta's shoulder, revealing his true intentions. He warned Mineta about the consequences of his actions regarding Kiri, and as he drained Mineta's life force, the outcome was clear. When he returned to class, the students were in shock. Aizawa, trailing behind, urged everyone to return to their seats, longing for a nap. Izuku, ever energetic, called out to his classmates, ready for their questions. As soon as everyone was seated, hands shot up, including Shoto's. Izuku called on him first, and Shoto asked about his 𝐼𝐻 quirk. Izuku explained that it was called alteration, demonstrating it by transforming Aizawa's sleeping bag into a tree with Aizawa still inside, who remained blissfully unaware. Next, he called on 𝐻𝐵H𝐸, who asked about the swords Izuku carried. Izuku teased that he would explain if someone asked the right question. Katsuki then inquired why Izuku had disappeared for nearly 2 years. Izuku recounted a brief history of his struggles, including a near-fatal encounter and the transformation he underwent during his coma. As the questions continued, Izuku revealed more about his quirks and the experiences that shaped him. He spoke of Kiri's role in his transformation, acknowledging her strength and the bond they shared. The class listened intently, captivated by his story and the revelations about his journey. When Izuku was caught as the 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷, several heroes close to him were sent into his memories while he was unconscious. One of those heroes was Aizawa, who was still asleep in a tree. Izuku mentioned that Aizawa had permission to discuss his memories, but he himself would not share any details. When he woke up the next afternoon, Kiri had manifested a physical body, though Izuku had no idea how. Both of them were permanently dressed in their combat attire. Upon manifesting, Kiri gifted him with new clothes, which were now the only ones he could wear due to the changes his quirk had made over time. She also provided him with 3 swords. Izuku picked up the swords and encouraged the front row to pass them around, but warned them not to cut themselves on the blades. He explained that the black blade could drain a person's life, the orange blade could erase someone from existence, and the blue blade could inject someone else's life energy into a person, causing them to explode. He mourned the loss of his friends, Jiro and Toga, while noting that 𝐷𝗶𝐻 had survived against the odds. Each blade had a specific purpose, and only he and Kiri could withstand being cut by them. He smiled gently as he watched Momo hand the death blade to an invisible person. Suddenly, there was a gasp from the crowd. Izuku noticed that 𝐒𝐻𝐻 had cut her finger. Realizing the gravity of the situation, he lamented that it was too late to do anything. He collected the blades and reholstered them as 𝐒𝐻𝐽's invisibility faded, revealing her distress. Her cries startled 𝐒𝐮𝐬, who was still stuck in the tree. Izuku apologized to 𝐒𝐮𝐬 for using him as an example and promised to take him to 𝗟𝗨 soon, but he needed to watch 𝐒𝐻𝐽 first. Minutes later, 𝐒𝐻𝐽's body lay on the floor, and Momo expressed her outrage at Izuku's actions. The others turned to glare at her, and Izuku challenged her to explain how he was the horrible person in this situation. He had warned everyone about the consequences of the blades, and he had endured much in his life, including being labeled a villain and a monster. He expressed his frustration at being judged by someone who had never experienced true pain. Tears streamed down Izuku's face as he struggled with his emotions. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 attempted to calm him, but Izuku reacted violently, throwing him against the wall. A crowd of students gathered outside the door, and several teachers, including Midnight, 𝗟𝗟𝗏, and 𝐼𝐻𝐽, entered the room. 𝐼𝐻𝐽 urged Izuku to stop his outburst, but Izuku lashed out, confronting 𝐼𝐻𝐽 about the impact of his actions. 𝗪𝐮𝐲 stepped in, recognizing that Izuku's quirk was overwhelming him again. He coordinated with the others to restrain Izuku, while Midnight prepared to knock him out. They managed to subdue him, and soon the 4 students in the front of the class fell asleep. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 approached Izuku, who was still agitated. He questioned Momo's decision to provoke Izuku in such a way. Momo tried to defend herself, but 𝐒𝐮𝐬 pointed out that 𝐒𝐻𝐽 had cut herself despite the warnings. He instructed Momo to leave the class and transfer out, which she did quickly. As the chaos settled, Kiri, who had been reabsorbed and then released by Izuku, began to wake up, repeatedly apologizing to him. Izuku was the last to regain consciousness, and he found the heroes on high alert. He looked around at the concerned faces and realized the weight of his actions. He expressed his sorrow, feeling like a monster for hurting someone again. He walked to the window, gazing out at the forest below, and sobbed as he unlocked it and began to climb down the side of the building. 𝐒𝐮𝐬 wrapped him in his scarf, trying to comfort him. Izuku insisted he was a monster, but 𝐒𝐮𝐬 reassured him that he was anything but that. He explained that Momo's words had triggered his failsafe mode and that they would help him through this. 𝗪𝗱 rushed to Izuku's side, cradling him and offering support. Izuku looked into 𝗪𝗱's heterochromatic eyes and confessed his love for him. Izuku and 𝗪𝐿 were training at 𝗂𝐽 Beach, having just finished cleaning the area to restore its beauty. 𝗪𝐿 challenged his brother to a race, declaring that the loser would have to do the dishes for a week. Izuku accepted the challenge, playfully teasing 𝗪𝐿 as he transformed into a caterpillar and landed in his brother's fluffy hair. As 𝗪𝐿 sprinted ahead, Izuku devised his plan. He intended to transform into a train just as 𝗪𝐿 approached the finish line. Meanwhile, 𝗪𝐿 searched for Izuku, glancing behind and to the sides, wondering where his brother had gone. As 𝗪𝐿 neared the finish line, Izuku executed his plan, transforming into a train and speeding past 𝗪𝐿. Although no harm was done, 𝗪𝐿 was left bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. Determined to get back at Izuku, 𝗪𝐿 called out to him. Izuku, still reluctant about the dishes, was caught off guard when 𝗪𝐿 used his quirk to command him to jump into the water. Izuku complied, face-planting into the shallow waves, while 𝗪𝐿 laughed heartily. Grumbling about his brother's antics, Izuku walked by, muttering about 𝗪𝐿's mischievousness. They continued their playful banter as they made their way home, arriving at their large house and passing through the small gate beside the driveway. It was nearly 11 p.m., and the light in their dad's bedroom was still on. The brothers exchanged glances, recalling that their dads had patrol duty that night. As they entered the house, they prepared for whatever awaited them. As they quietly ascended the stairs, they heard thumping noises from their parents' room. Izuku transformed his arms into lion-like appendages, claws extended, while 𝗪𝐿 readied his capture weapon. They cautiously cracked open the door to peek inside, only to realize they had made a mistake. They overheard Hisashi's voice, and Izuku felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He quickly retreated down the stairs, with 𝗪𝐿 following closely behind. Once outside, Izuku expressed his distress, insisting they grab a tent and camp in the backyard instead. 𝗪𝐿 agreed, rushing to gather sleeping bags, while Izuku quickly collected food, blankets, and pillows. They hurried outside, setting up their belongings in the backyard. After 30 minutes, they settled in, but Izuku couldn't help but comment on the noise coming from the house. 𝗀𝐿 laughed, suggesting they focus on their movie instead. He held up the film they had chosen, The Maze Runner. The next morning, 𝗏𝗪𝐬 and Hisashi came downstairs, both dressed casually. 𝗏𝗪𝐬 asked Hisashi to wake the boys, and Hisashi playfully teased him before heading off. Meanwhile, Izuku and 𝗀𝐿 had just fallen asleep in the backyard after consuming the last of 𝗏𝗪𝐬's coffee stash as a form of revenge. Hisashi checked each room in the house, growing increasingly concerned when he couldn't find the boys. After searching the gym and living room, he decided to inform 𝗏𝗪𝐬. When Hisashi approached 𝗏𝗪𝐬, he sensed something was off. After a brief exchange, Hisashi revealed that the kids were missing. 𝗏𝗪𝐬, alarmed, urged Hisashi to check their location using the Find My iPhone feature. After a moment, Hisashi discovered that the boys were in the backyard. The two heroes made their way outside, where they found the tent set up and music playing from within. They entered the tent, careful not to disturb the sleeping boys. However, 𝗏𝗪𝐬's attention was drawn to the coffee mugs left behind, and he felt a surge of irritation. Izuku was abruptly awakened by 𝗏𝗪𝐬's playful yet forceful entrance, causing him to exclaim in surprise. Hisashi laughed at the scene, while 𝗀𝐿 was doused with cold water as he woke up. The atmosphere turned chaotic as the boys reacted to their parents' presence. 𝗏𝗪𝐬, visibly annoyed yet amused, instructed them to get up for breakfast. When Izuku hesitantly asked about the coffee, 𝗏𝗪𝐬 shot them a stern look, reminding them of the need to replenish his coffee stock. He then lightened the mood, inviting them to join him for breakfast, promising a day filled with family time. As the day progressed, the brothers momentarily forgot about their coffee-related responsibilities, enjoying their time together. 𝗏𝗪𝐬 entered Izuku's room, where the two teenagers were relaxing. He inquired if his coffee had been refilled and decided to check for himself. In an instant, the boys vanished, leaving their wallets on the dresser and their shoes by the door. 𝗏𝗪𝐬 chuckled to himself, heading to his bedroom, fully expecting that they wouldn't return anytime soon. Meanwhile, Izuku and 𝗀𝐿 raced down the street, having transformed their clothes into falcons. They arrived at the store in just 5 minutes. Izuku instructed 𝗀𝐿 to hand over his wallet, declaring he would fetch 𝗏𝗪𝐬's favorite coffee and return quickly. The transformation required a lot of energy, so he could only do it occasionally. 𝗀𝐿 sighed and complied. Inside the store, Izuku bought the entire stock of 𝗏𝗪𝐬's preferred coffee. When he checked out, he nearly fainted at the total, almost $1,000, split between him and 𝗀𝐿. The box weighed 2 pounds and cost only $5, resulting in a massive amount of coffee. Using the last of his energy, Izuku transformed into a shopping cart and turned 𝗀𝐿's clothing into a horse. He urged 𝗀𝐿 to load the coffee into the cart and run. Izuku struggled to catch his breath, his energy dangerously low. 𝗀𝐿, now shirtless with his shirt transformed into a horse, clung to the back, steering the horse while holding the cart filled with coffee. He shouted that Izuku owed him if he survived this ordeal, feeling his muscles strain as Izuku's transformation began to revert. They made it back home with 34 minutes to spare. Izuku, however, had passed out mid-transformation, which caused him to turn into various forms he had seen throughout the day. This rapid shifting exhausted him, leaving him unable to move the next day. 𝗀𝐿 worriedly decided to call their father for help. 𝗏𝗪𝐬 answered, asking if they had the coffee. 𝗀𝐿 confirmed they did but explained that Izuku had overused his quirk and was now incapacitated just inside the gates. 𝗏𝗪𝐬 mentioned he was in the backyard and would come quickly, having almost lost the cat during patrol. As 𝗀𝐿 looked back at Izuku, he swore he had seen him transform into a lifeless form several times. Soon, Hisashi arrived, hardly out of breath from running. He questioned if Izuku had really turned into a dead body, and 𝗏𝗪𝐬 confirmed it. 𝗀𝐿 hesitated before admitting that Izuku had overdone it with his quirk. Their father sighed heavily, noting that training would have to wait until Friday when Izuku could move again. He expressed his shock at the nearly $1,000 missing from their account. 𝗀𝐿 mumbled that it was 𝗏𝗪𝐬's fault, prompting 𝐼𝐻𝐬 to use his signature hair trick to demand clarification. 𝗪𝐻 explained that they had consumed all the coffee, which had caused the window to vibrate. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 turned a shade of red while Hisashi laughed, teasing him about being a bottom. A familiar scarf wrapped around 𝗪𝐻, pulling him inside as Izuku's transformations began to settle. Hisashi lay down next to Izuku on the grass and soon fell asleep. Around 9 a.m., Izuku woke up, his body aching. He spotted Hisashi's blonde hair nearby and tried to muster enough energy to exhale loudly, hoping to wake him. When Hisashi finally stirred at 9:30, he was confused about why he was on the lawn until he saw Izuku, who looked utterly exhausted and unable to move. Hisashi greeted Izuku, who blinked in response, clearly not in the mood for conversation. Hisashi chuckled and picked him up, knowing that if Izuku could wince, he would. It felt as though he had been hit by a train powered by 20 all-mights. When they entered the house, 𝐻𝐻𝐬 and 𝗪𝐻 were on the couch, enjoying chocolate chip pancakes. Izuku protested, feeling it was unfair, especially given his current state. 𝗪𝐻 rushed over, concerned for Izuku's well-being. Hisashi reassured them that Izuku would be fine by that evening. As Izuku was propped up facing the TV, 𝐻𝐻𝐬 apologized, reminding him not to touch the coffee again. He then stood up and started the movie, The Aristocats. Izuku mentally screamed the lyrics of a song in frustration as he realized he could move his arms and legs slightly. He attempted to get off the couch, forgetting that it was 3 feet off the ground due to everyone in the house being tall. In the kitchen, 𝗪𝐻, Hisashi, and 𝐻𝐻𝐬 were preparing katsudon and pork cutlet bowls for dinner. 𝗪𝐻 asked his father for the vegetables, and as 𝐻𝐻𝐬 handed them over, he nearly dropped them, causing 𝗪𝐻 to catch them just in time. Hisashi decided to check on Izuku, leaving the busy kitchen. From the living room, they heard Izuku's frustrated voice. When they entered, they found him face down on the floor, while Hisashi struggled to lift him back onto the couch, exclaiming how heavy he was. He was a massive beluga whale. Izuku, managing to move his face slightly, scowled and expressed that he could hear his father. By the end of the night, he was able to walk fairly normally and speak with a slight stutter. 𝐻𝐻𝐬 reassured him that they would make chocolate chip pancakes again in the morning. Izuku smirked at his father's horrified expression, playfully threatening that he would paralyze him and eat his favorite breakfast in front of him while drinking coffee. A month later, Momo returned to you. After taking a week of personal leave followed by a 3-week suspension. During her time away, she reflected on her actions and decided to apologize to Izuku. As she walked down the hallway to Class 1A, she spotted the familiar green hair of Izuku. She called out to him, and he turned around, his eyes widening in recognition. He greeted her in his usual emotionless tone, but Momo sensed a hint of something different this time. She expressed her sincere apologies for the harsh words she had spoken to him. Bowing down in front of him, she pleaded for his forgiveness. Izuku knelt before her, leaning on one knee. He shared that he had been trying to find forgiveness in his heart for her. However, before he could fully accept her apology, he needed her to understand that he spoke with complete sincerity. He explained that he rarely joked due to his past and training. If she wanted his forgiveness, he requested that she walk through his memories for just an hour, with Kiri as her guide. He offered his hand to help her up. Momo agreed and asked where they would go for this experience. Izuku informed her they would head to the support room, having already messaged his father about missing the first and possibly second PRD. As he turned to walk away, Momo was puzzled by his mention of probably second PRD, thinking it was only supposed to be 1 hour. She hurried after him. Upon reaching the support room, Izuku asked Kiri if she was ready, and she nodded in response. As he lay down on the couch, Kiri instructed Momo to set everything down except her clothing to avoid it getting stuck in the dream space. Kiri then guided Momo to place her head against Izuku's forehead, just below his hairline. Once they were ready, Momo's body fell to the floor, and Izuku passed out as well. In the dream space, Momo looked around at the white and gray surroundings until Kiri appeared before her. Kiri asked if Momo was sure she was ready for this, to which Momo eagerly replied that she was. Kiri explained that Momo could choose specific memories, allowing her to select one memory for each of the past 5 years. A holographic wall appeared, and Momo chose her memories, repeating the process 4 more times. Noticing Kiri's worried expression, Momo inquired if everything was all right. Kiri reassured her that while each memory would be choppy due to time constraints, they would proceed. Momo nodded, and a scene unfolded before her. She saw Izuku yelling at a girl with near black hair and earphone jacks for earlobes. The girl appeared furious and shouted back at him. Momo noticed that she couldn't hear the exchange and questioned Kiri about it. Kiri hesitated before confirming that Momo had chosen to mute the memories. In an instant, the scene shifted to a younger Izuku holding a pistol, expressing his frustration with chilling calmness. He told the girl that it had been a trap and that she had made a poor decision. After putting the gun away, he walked off. The dream space transitioned to a slightly older Izuku, who approached a bar with a carefree attitude. He asked for something to help him cope before returning home. A man with pale blue hair questioned his choices, urging him to take action against the girl who had been tormenting him. Izuku's expression shifted from pain to anger as he yelled at the man to stay out of his life before grabbing a bottle of pills. The memory then shifted to Izuku trying to sneak back into his home, only to be confronted by a woman resembling him. She sweetly asked about his day, but he grimaced and demanded she stop pretending. Her demeanor changed, and she swiftly attacked him with a kitchen knife, narrowly missing a vital artery. Izuku fought to suppress any sound, reminding himself not to scream or cry, while Momo felt the emotional turmoil coursing through him. The dream space shifted again to a classroom scene where a younger Bakugo threw Izuku's book out the window, cruelly suggesting he should jump off a roof to hope for a better Quirk in his next life. Momo gasped quietly, realizing just how harsh Bakugo could be. The next memory took place on a rooftop with 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐿, who suggested that Izuku's Quirk would be better suited for villainy. Later, Izuku was seen writing a note, contemplating a drastic decision. He stood at the edge of the roof, speaking to himself before transforming into a bird and soaring into the sky. Momo noticed Aizawa and Yamada rushing to the building, with Yamada urging Aizawa to catch Izuku before it was too late. But it was already too late, and Momo watched as Izuku fell from a great height, his body bouncing off an invisible force. All Might was thrown into a building, while Izuku was rushed to the hospital. Aizawa-sensei was in a state of panic. Kiri made her first appearance. Izuku woke up, ready for his final mission as the Crimson Reaper. The dreamscape shifted to a cherished memory. All Might, Izuku, Kiri, 𝐼𝐮𝐲, Aizawa-sensei, Yamada-sensei, Midnight, Recovery Girl, and Nizu were gathered around a table, laughing as they played a board game filled with fake money and small pieces to move. Nizu emerged as the winner, leaning back as the others continued to compete. Aizawa-sensei claimed second place, Izuku came in third, Yamada followed in fourth, and the laughter filled the room, creating a joyful atmosphere. The next day arrived quickly, and Izuku received a text in the early hours, around 3 in the morning. He groaned in frustration before checking his phone, his expression shifting to one of alarm as he abruptly woke Kiri. Kiri, still groggy, questioned what was happening. Izuku insisted they needed to leave immediately and urged her to get ready. He donned his combat gear and grabbed his swords, revealing the urgency of the situation. Kiri expressed her concern, but Izuku was focused, declaring they had a target to pursue. Unbeknownst to them, a certain black-haired coffee enthusiast was also awake. Izuku glided down the street on his scythe, with Kiri effortlessly keeping pace. She inquired if this was about his mother, to which Izuku responded with a curt nod, leaning forward to gain speed. They soon arrived at Izuku's old house, a place filled with painful memories. The door was slightly ajar, and they could hear shuffling from within. Both Izuku and Kiri drew their black swords, taking cautious steps forward until Izuku, in a moment of impatience, kicked the door off its hinges. Inside the living room sat Izuku Midoriya. Izuku instructed Kiri to hide and wait for his signal, and she complied, disappearing into the shadows. Izuku confronted Izuku, expressing his disdain for her. She greeted him with surprise and attempted to embrace him, but he glared at her, filled with anger. He accused her of being a coward and a fraud, questioning how a mother could inflict such pain on her child for so long. Izuku, with tears in her eyes, claimed her actions were out of love, insisting she had raised him to be strong. But Izuku countered, asserting that she had turned him into the Crimson Reaper, a villain. He proclaimed that the people who truly cared for him were the ones who shaped him into who he was, not her. In the shadows, Momo watched in horror, feeling the weight of Izuku's emotions, his anger, fear, and betrayal. Aizawa entered the room unnoticed by the others, though Kiri recognized him from her hiding place. Kiri warned Aizawa to leave, but he insisted on helping Izuku, having witnessed his struggles. 𝐾𝐿 taunted Izuku about his relationship with Kiri, but he silenced her. Unbeknownst to him, she summoned a knife from the kitchen, which struck him in the thigh. Izuku, unfazed, declared that she had earned a trip to hell, instructing Kiri to keep Aizawa occupied. As Aizawa and Kiri engaged in combat, Izuku dragged 𝐾𝐿 toward the kitchen, determined to confront her. Kiri warned Aizawa that he couldn't interfere, but he insisted on helping Izuku, recalling the boy's painful memories. Izuku prepared to confront 𝐾𝐿, heating up the stove. He asked her to choose how she wanted to suffer, but she remained silent, trembling with fear. He mocked her reluctance, asserting that he would show her no mercy, just as she had shown him none. As he pressed her hand against the hot burner, the sound of sizzling filled the air, pushing Izuku to the brink of his sanity. 𝐾𝐿 begged for mercy, promising to do anything, but Izuku only laughed, reminding her of the pain she had inflicted on him. He noticed Aizawa and Kiri watching him, their expressions filled with concern. One individual wore a horrified expression while the other displayed approval. The tall green-haired figure seized the woman on the ground by her hair and pulled her upright. He expressed his disdain, indicating that this was a consequence of the torment she had caused him over the years. He lifted her head just above the burner, pressing it down, the heat beginning to affect her skin. Momo watched in utter horror, grappling with the understanding of his pain, anger, and anguish, yet struggling to comprehend how far he had gone. Aizawa rushed from the room, feeling overwhelmed, while Kiri observed with a hint of disturbance before checking on Aizawa. He noted that Aizawa was experiencing intense flashbacks, which were only intensifying, leading to a loss of sanity. They needed to restrain him. Aizawa simply washed his face and nodded, and they returned to the kitchen. Izuku was laughing uncontrollably, rocking back and forth while kicking the woman's body, which was now unrecognizable. He exclaimed in a childlike tone that he had succeeded in getting rid of her, seeking Kiri's approval. They exchanged nervous glances, and Aizawa urged Izuku to come over and rest. Izuku climbed over but resisted sleep, prompting Kiri to gently strike him on the neck, causing him to pass out. Kiri reassured Aizawa that he would be fine. Kiri and Aizawa returned to the large house they had been living in, realizing they had been gone for 5 hours. It was now 8 o'clock. Hisashi greeted them with enthusiasm, but his chatter halted as he noticed the unsettling smell and the expressions on their faces, along with the unconscious figure of Izuku. Aizawa explained the situation regarding 𝐾𝐿 and what had transpired. Hisashi's concern for Izuku was evident as he asked Kiri if he was okay. Kiri reassured him that he would be fine. With that, the memory faded, and they all awakened in the support room. Izuku's face was streaked with tears, Kiri appeared unsettled, and Momo looked frozen in fear. The green-haired figure was the first to speak, asserting that they had not yet witnessed the worst of it and rejecting any pity offered to him. He declared that he only needed to grow stronger. Momo, despite his wishes, expressed her deep regret for her earlier outburst, acknowledging the painful memory he had endured. However, she was abruptly silenced as he pinned her against the wall, warning her never to mention that incident again. Momo nodded in understanding, apologizing repeatedly. Izuku then softened slightly, indicating that he had forgiven her for staying in his memories for 3 hours, and turned away, leaving a tense silence in the room. Nearly 600 reads had left the author in disbelief. They hoped for more votes, feeling a bit lonely. They expressed gratitude to their readers and shared their excitement about the story nearing 700 reads. They also mentioned that although it was the second year for the characters, the 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐽 event was approaching, which was necessary for the plot. The author returned to the story, noting that updates might take longer due to summer school commitments in math. Izuku turned to walk away from Momo but suddenly froze, realizing the presence of Aizawa, Hisashi, Nizu, and a large crowd of heroes. Some heroes were keeping the crowd at bay outside the support room. Izuku nervously rubbed his neck and greeted his father and the others, inquiring about their day. Aizawa, usually stoic, displayed a look of sheer panic. It was early in the day, and classes had yet to begin, but students were arriving. Aizawa had allowed Izuku and Momo to skip the first hour. 15 minutes into class, Aizawa was discussing critical first aid, covering scenarios like cardiac arrest and severe injuries. Most students were attentive, taking notes, except for Kaminari and Mina, who were distracted. Aizawa sighed, preparing to reprimand them when two screams echoed through the halls, screams filled with terror. He instructed the class to remain alert until his return, but a few minutes later, the students followed him. The screams continued to pierce the silence, coming from the support room. Class 2A, being the closest, arrived first. Kirishima peered inside, paling slightly, and turned to Shoto, Bakugo, and 𝐮𝐴, warning them that it was not a pleasant sight. 𝗟𝗏 convinced 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐷𝐼 to let the three boys through, knowing he wouldn't refuse him. Inside, they saw Aizawa and Mike standing protectively in front of a couch. Bakugo wondered what was happening, while 𝗟𝐿 and Shoto sensed it involved Izuku. They approached cautiously, noticing panic on Aizawa and Mike's faces. Shoto was the first to see Izuku, who was trembling on the couch. Momo lay unconscious on the floor beside him, her hands seemingly glued to his forehead, her face pale and shaking. Kirishima stood nearby, appearing entranced. 𝗟𝐿, feeling anxious, began to hyperventilate, realizing the gravity of the situation. Aizawa and Mike comforted him, urging him to breathe. Another chilling scream escaped Momo, causing her to inhale sharply before her shaking resumed. Bakugo shouted, demanding to know what had happened. 𝗟𝐿, looking pale, explained that Izuku had taken them into his memories, a revelation that shocked everyone. Aizawa clarified that Kiri's power allowed him to immerse others in someone's memories, and he had seen some of Izuku's memories, horrific ones. A crowd of students gathered at the doors, including Nizu, who had also witnessed the turmoil within Izuku's mind. After a tense 20 minutes filled with screams and questions, they finally regained consciousness, looking disheveled. Izuku was in tears, Momo appeared terrified, and Kirishima looked unsettled. Momo began to apologize but made the mistake of mentioning the time Izuku had accidentally harmed his friends. In an instant, Izuku reacted, pinning her against the wall, his fury evident. Realizing the crowd's presence, he was taken aback. Aizawa broke the silence, expressing his fear rather than anger, and instructed 𝐒𝐮𝐷𝐼 to erect a temporary wall for privacy. Bakugo and Shoto were left to witness the unfolding drama. Aizawa rushed to Izuku, embracing him tightly, tears streaming down both their faces. He expressed his anguish at having to watch Izuku suffer for hours, urging him never to do that again. Izuku, sniffling, explained that Momo needed to understand, as she had chosen some of his worst memories. As Izuku recounted his experiences, Bakugo and Shoto listened in horror. Bakugo stuttered in disbelief, questioning if Izuku had been responsible for 𝐼𝐻𝐻𝐿's fate. Izuku responded with a blank stare filled with underlying fury, confirming it. Shoto, relating to Izuku's pain, tackled him in a hug, pleading for him to communicate whenever he was hurting. Izuku promised to do so and returned the gesture with a gentle kiss. Eventually, everyone returned to class. Momo remained lost in her thoughts, but that was her character. Izuku, Bakugo, Kirishima, Shoto, and 𝗟𝐿 left for the cafeteria early, earning the nickname 𝗟𝗶𝗸 due to their combined strength. They grabbed their lunches and settled at a table in the back. Izuku teasingly asked Bakugo if he and Kirishima were dating, causing Kirishima to laugh while Bakugo flushed a deep red. Bakugo expressed his affection for Shoto, appreciating his quirky nature, and playfully put him in a friendly headlock. The group engaged in light-hearted banter, avoiding any mention of earlier events. When the bell rang, more students entered the cafeteria, eager for lunch. Shoto suddenly shouted in distress, drawing Izuku's attention to a Class 2B student, Nito Monoma, who had knocked Shoto's soba onto the floor. Izuku thought to himself that Monoma must have a death wish. With a smirk, he addressed Monoma, pointing out that he had made his beloved friend upset and questioned whether he valued his life. Monoma casually leaned on Izuku, dismissing him. Izuku, feeling the height difference, stood tall and retorted that he had earned his place at the academy through skill, warning Monoma about the dangers of his quirk. He leaned closer, whispering ominously about the potential consequences of Monoma's actions, leaving the blonde looking terrified before he fled the scene. Izuku then bought Shoto another serving of soba as the cafeteria buzzed with activity once more. Excitedly, he invited his friends over to his house, suggesting they could enjoy the pool and gym. The enthusiastic response from his friends was met with laughter from Kirishima. As they discussed their plans, Aoyama asked if he could join, and after some playful back and forth, he was included. Izuku and his friends made their way to the Aizawa household, where 𝗟𝐿 laid down some ground rules for their visit. Upon arriving at the impressive house, which had recently expanded, Kirishima exclaimed in excitement, wondering why they hadn't been invited sooner. Izuku explained that he hadn't known or trusted them before. Aoyama expressed his eagerness to see the inside of the house, and Izuku unlocked the gate with a wrist scan, impressing his friends with the high-tech security. Once inside, they were greeted by Aizawa, who was casually dressed and welcomed them home. The group was curious about Aizawa's partner, who they would meet at dinner. Izuku asked if everyone had brought clothes for the night, receiving blank stares from most, except for Aoyama, who confirmed he had. Izuku assured them he and 𝗟𝐿 would have clothes that would fit. He led the way, calling everyone to follow him, and 𝗏𝐿𝐬 dashed down the stairs, laughing loudly, while Kirishima chased after him, questioning his earlier claims about his preferences. At the bottom of the stairs, the group was awestruck by the large swimming pool and gym area. 𝗏𝐿𝐬 and Kirishima praised the impressive setup, excited about the prospect of visiting often. Aoyama added his own enthusiastic remarks in French, while Izuku shared that swimming was his favorite way to unwind. Meanwhile, upstairs, Kirishima helped prepare vegetables with Hisashi and Aizawa. When asked why he wasn't with the others, he admitted he preferred to help out in the kitchen. Hisashi danced to the music playing, and Aizawa encouraged Kirishima to share more about himself, assuring him they wouldn't judge. Kirishima hesitated, unsure if it was a good idea, but Aizawa's gentle demeanor reassured him. Kirishima had long since stopped counting the years. The two adults exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of surprise and curiosity as she continued her story. She shared her origins, explaining that she was born in Austria, her mother in Russia, where she also passed away. Her father, raised in Japan, had brought her here when she was just 3 years old after her mother's death. He had found work at the hospital where she met Izuku. Kirishima hesitated for a moment before Aizawa asked about her mother's quirk. Her response revealed that her mother was one of the earliest quirked individuals, though it stemmed from experimentation. She had requested her father to administer the same serum he had used on himself. The couple exchanged worried looks upon hearing this. Kirishima continued, explaining that her father's quirk, age gap, had allowed him to become the first quirked person through similar means. He was the doctor who had saved Izuku, and to her, he was a 307-year-old father who had trained her in combat for as long as she could remember. She concluded her tale with a grim smile, mentioning that she had taken her own life when all for one pursued her quirk. Hisashi acknowledged her story, noting that every hero had a challenging past. He expressed gratitude for her support during Izuku's darkest moments, when he had felt utterly alone. With a warm smile, he embraced her, while Aizawa offered a gentle smile in agreement. Hisashi then suggested they gather the children for dinner. As they moved downstairs, the group decided to start their training in the gym before returning to the pool. Aoyama took to the treadmill, practicing with a staff, while the others engaged in weightlifting, sparring, and weapon training. Izuku and 𝗟𝐿 shared their knowledge of new techniques, demonstrating the use of firearms and blades. A sudden knock at the open door caught their attention, freezing 𝗏𝐿𝐬, Aoyama, and Kirishima in place, their eyes wide with shock. 𝗏𝐿𝐬 shouted in disbelief at the sight of present Mike. Izuku calmly acknowledged him, and 𝗀𝐻𝐻 asked what he wanted. The energetic teacher informed them that dinner was ready and urged them to clean up before heading upstairs. As they prepared, Izuku reminded everyone to keep their clothes on during the shower. Kirishima, however, removed his shirt and shorts, prompting an amused reaction from 𝗀𝐻𝐻, who was quickly silenced by Bakugo's warning. 𝗀𝐻𝐻 admitted his feelings for Denki, expressing his self-consciousness about revealing them. Izuku reassured him, then took off his shirt, revealing a fit physique. After a brief moment with Shoto, they all showered and headed to dinner, which was delightful. They enjoyed the meal and the pool afterward, gradually coming to terms with the revelation of present Mike being Aizawa's husband, while being reminded to keep it a secret. Later that night, they settled into their rooms. Kirishima and Bakugo shared one, while Aoyama and 𝗀𝐻𝐻 took another, and Izuku and Shoto shared theirs. Aizawa checked on Izuku periodically. Around 4 a.m., he went downstairs for coffee when he heard a soft voice and a quiet sound from Izuku's room. Alarmed, he tiptoed down the hallway. Inside, he overheard Shoto complimenting Izuku's body, urging him to appreciate his scars. Aizawa's thoughts raced, and he decided to intervene, kicking down the door. The sight before him shocked him. Both boys were caught in an NTMT moment, quickly scrambling for cover as Aizawa glared at Shoto and pulled him out of bed, dragging him downstairs. The other boys were now awake, trying to make sense of the situation, while Hisashi and 𝗀𝐻𝐻 laughed uncontrollably. Izuku dashed past them, his face flushed as he attempted to fix his shorts, which only made everyone laugh harder. 𝗀𝐻𝐻 announced it was time to get up for training, leaving the others in disbelief at the early hour. As they crept down the stairs, they found Shoto and Izuku sitting on opposite sides of the living room, with Aizawa pacing angrily between them. He warned Shoto that he would not hesitate to expel him if he ever witnessed such behavior again, and he scolded Izuku for his lack of judgment. Izuku retorted that technically, Aizawa had seen and heard other things first. Aizawa glared at him, and the boy continued to tease him with his logic. Frustrated, Aizawa ordered them outside, instructing Izuku to lead Shoto through their drills. As they headed to the front lawn, Izuku muttered under his breath, expressing his annoyance at Aizawa's strictness while starting his workout. The green-haired young man urged his boyfriend to get moving. Soon, everyone else joined in, following the lead of Izuku and Shoto, though the two remained shirtless. Kirishima energetically announced the plan while distributing slips of paper filled with instructions. Kirishima and Bakugo expressed their disbelief at the daunting task ahead, but a stern look from Aizawa silenced their complaints, prompting Hisashi to chuckle. Kirishima outlined the workout. 30 minutes to complete 70 crunches, 50 sit-ups, and the push-ups were already done. They would also tackle 50 flutter kicks and 20 bicycle kicks. Afterward, there would be a 5-minute break before sparring until 5:45, followed by a 15-minute rest. At 6 o'clock, they would embark on a long run, taking an hour to reach their destination and another hour to return. With enthusiasm, Kirishima rallied the newcomers to get started. Meanwhile, hidden behind the wrought iron gate, a man and his companions observed the training session. He expressed confidence that they would meet again soon, instructing Kurojirai to take them away. In an instant, they vanished from sight. Everyone except Aoyama stayed for the entire weekend. He struggled to keep up with the daily training. Bakugo, Kirishima, and Shoto had all developed new skills and gained some lean muscle. It was Monday again, and everyone got up for a less intense workout and a shorter run before heading home for breakfast, showering, and leaving for school. Mina rushed over, excitedly exclaiming about Bakugo's newfound muscles, while Kirishima protectively declared that Bakugo was his. Izuku, feeling uneasy about the day ahead, urged everyone to hurry to the bus to avoid being late. Ida, however, was disappointed because his seating arrangement had not worked out. As the group navigated through the crowd forming around the bus for the first field trip of the year, they overheard whispers and taunts from various students. They were recognized as the 𝗟𝗶𝗸, known for their impressive mock battle victories. Just then, Monoma appeared, his signature grin in place, and Shoto confirmed their identity as the 𝗟𝗶𝗸, which made Monoma momentarily falter before he attempted to downplay it. Once Monoma left, Shoto and the others burst into laughter, momentarily forgetting their worries. 𝗏𝐿, after catching his breath, suggested they load up the bus, expressing his longing for some rest. Izuku and Shoto settled into a spot at the back, with Izuku curling into Shoto's side. Izuku was jolted awake by the sound of camera shutters and the sight of half the class surrounding them. Aizawa called out to the students packed in the back of the bus, and they responded in unison as they exited. Upon entering, they were greeted by the pro-hero 13, who pulled Aizawa aside and held up 3 fingers. 𝗏𝐿 and Izuku sighed, knowing Aizawa's tendency to overlook important details. 13 welcomed the students to the unexpected simulation joint, also known as the USJ, but Izuku interrupted, sensing something was amiss. His instincts were never wrong. Aizawa immediately went on high alert as a horde of villains emerged from a swirling purple-black portal. Izuku recognized this portal all too well. The League of Villains had arrived. He urged 13 to evacuate the students, knowing the danger they were in. While Aizawa and Momo recognized some of the villains from Izuku's memories, the students were still in the dark. Izuku donned his new mask and leaped in front of the villain leaders, greeting Shigaraki with a cool demeanor. It took a moment for Shigaraki to recognize him, and when he did, he demanded to know why Izuku was with the heroes and what had happened to him. Izuku casually explained his journey, mentioning his new quirk and the loss of his friends, before discarding his mask and summoning a giant scythe. Spinner, another villain, questioned Izuku's combat attire and the 3 swords he carried, prompting Shigaraki to realize Izuku had been chosen for something significant. This revelation excited Shigaraki, who declared that they needed to keep Izuku alive. Izuku's eyes widened in alarm as a portal opened beneath some students, including Kirishima, whisking them away to different parts of the dome. He cursed under his breath, realizing he had to act quickly. He instructed Aizawa to disable the warp gate's quirk and have Ida run for help while he prepared to confront the villains. With determination, Izuku brandished his black blade, ready to protect his friends. As he fought alongside Kirishima, they took down villains one by one until only a handful remained, along with the 3 leaders from the League. Shigaraki, frustrated, ordered the Nomu to attack Izuku. Izuku whispered a quick plan to Kirishima before dodging the Nomu's assault, asking him to find a safe place for his body so Izuku could absorb his strength. As Kirishima vanished, Izuku's eyes transformed into a unique galaxy color, signaling a surge of power. He warned Shigaraki not to mess with those he cared about, the galaxy energy enveloping him. Shigaraki, taken aback, repeated his command for the Nomu to attack, but Izuku soon realized the creature was targeting his father instead. Panic surged through him as he launched himself at the Nomu, witnessing Aizawa in pain as the creature harmed him. With a swift kick, Izuku pushed the beast away, ready to protect his loved ones at all costs. He then handed his orange and gold healing sword to Katsuki, instructing him to press the side of it against Shoto's arms and injuries before urging him to leave. With a heartfelt declaration of love, he kissed Shoto and vanished. Bakugo followed the Greenette's orders, and Aizawa stood up as if he hadn't just faced a terrifying creature. He commanded the students to leave immediately, insisting that Izuku and Kiri could handle the situation. The students rushed out, hoping Izuku and Kiri could hold off the beast long enough. They were unaware that Kiri was merged with Izuku until he placed her unconscious form into Momo's arms. The class gasped in shock, realizing Izuku was alone, battling dangerous villains. Aizawa prevented them from intervening, warning that Izuku would be put in danger if they interfered. Inside, the Nomu and Izuku fought fiercely. His blade seemed ineffective against the creature, which was filled with too many life forces. However, with each strike, the Nomu shrank slightly. Izuku leaped into the air to deliver a powerful kick to the exposed brain, but the Nomu was faster and caught his ankle. Izuku's alteration quirk was of no use. The Nomu was alive, and he could only rely on his upgrade body for a brief moment, which drained a significant amount of energy. The creature seized Izuku's ankle and slammed him against a rock wall. Despite the pain, he continued to fight valiantly. Shigaraki ordered the Nomu to make Izuku's demise slow and painful, and the beast complied. It gripped Izuku's neck and wrist, pulling until it threatened to tear them apart. The creature continued its assault, snapping his leg at the knee, causing Izuku to let out a piercing scream. As the 𝐼𝐻𝐻 lifted him into the air, Izuku drove his blade into the creature, striking through its brain and heart. The 𝐼𝐻𝐻 quickly began to wither, prompting Shigaraki to scream in fury. Shigaraki called for 𝐾𝐮𝐲 to leave, turning back to Izuku with a menacing promise to return for him and his quirk. Izuku, his eyes glowing a toxic green, retorted that it was fortunate he was stronger than All Might. As Shigaraki stepped through his portal, Izuku taunted him, warning him to watch his step. The door burst open, revealing All Might at the top of the stairs, declaring his arrival. However, he quickly realized that Izuku was the only one left, and he needed immediate medical attention. Kiri, who had regained consciousness, called out to Aizawa, expressing her concern for Izuku's life due to his severe injuries. Hearing that the villains were gone, Aizawa rushed toward the entrance, only to be blocked by 𝗏𝗏, who shouted his signature phrase. Aizawa pushed past and saw the last remnants of a portal vanish. He frantically called for Izuku, and the duo began searching the water zone, unaware that Izuku was in the mountain zone, broken and in dire condition. The other pro-heroes arrived, and Aizawa instructed them to split up, explaining that Izuku had stayed behind to deal with the villains. He urged everyone to hurry and spread out. As Aizawa headed toward the conflagration zone, he heard a faint cough and the sound of rubble falling. If not for his keen hearing, he would have missed it. He directed his team toward the mountain zone, where they began calling for Izuku. Initially, there was no response, but soon they heard more rubble shifting behind a small cliff. Izuku lay trapped beneath a pile of rocks, his body battered and bloodied. He saw a blurry figure approaching and weakly raised his black sword, warning them to stay back. A rock fell, causing him to cry out in pain. Hisashi's eyes widened in horror, and he shouted for medical assistance, running to Izuku's side. He recognized the boy's struggle and reassured him that he had won, urging him to hold on. As other pros and a few students joined the search, they heard Hisashi's panicked voice. Snipe urged 𝗏𝗏𝐸 to fetch the medics, and the group rushed toward Mike's location. 𝗏𝗏𝐸 nodded and sprinted off. When they reached Mike, they found him, Midnight, and Aizawa frantically trying to move large rocks. Aizawa instructed the fastest among them to get 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐻𝐻 for help. All Might quickly returned with 𝗟𝗏𝐼𝐻𝐻, and everyone asked about Izuku's whereabouts. All Might informed them that he was trapped under the rubble. Finally, a pale hand emerged from the debris, prompting 𝗏𝗏𝗏 to scream in terror, desperately hoping for Izuku's safety. He couldn't shake the feeling that Izuku understood the gravity of his situation. No, he couldn't think like that. After several more minutes of clearing rubble, the broken form of Izuku Aizawa was finally uncovered. 𝗏𝗏𝐸 leaped down from where he had been moving rocks, and the medics rushed in swiftly. One medic with metallic teal hair checked for a pulse, exclaiming that it was faint. Izuku's eyes were barely open, and he seemed to struggle to say something. Aizawa, who was beside his son as they hurried him out, leaned closer to hear him better. Izuku managed to whisper that he had achieved his goal and felt he could die with fewer regrets now. He expressed his gratitude to his father and shared his love for Pops, 𝗏𝗏𝗏, and the rest of the group. Suddenly, his eyes rolled back, and his body began to convulse. Aizawa screamed at the medics, demanding they save his son, who was on the brink of death. Classmates and reporters crowded the path as they rushed Izuku out of the building. Hisashi asked 𝗏𝗏𝐸 where Izuku's sword was, and without a word, 𝗏𝗏𝐸 handed it over. Hisashi instructed Kiri to help him, explaining that the sword could heal and reverse injuries. He pushed through the crowd, shouting for everyone to move aside, insisting that if Izuku died, they would all face consequences. Kiri approached Izuku, reassuring him that they were there for him and urging him not to leave them. She gently moved the medics aside and pressed the golden blade against his injuries, explaining that while it wouldn't fully heal him, it would keep him alive long enough to reach the hospital. She pulled Aizawa back as he struggled, and he fell to his knees, lamenting that he could have helped. 𝗪𝐻𝐿 comforted him, reminding him that Izuku's sword had likely saved his life. 2 weeks later, the media was buzzing, trying to uncover the identity of the mysterious fighter known only as Kuzu. Class 1A, midnight, and the Aizawa family had been camped out in the hospital lobby, only leaving for brief necessities. Izuku had emerged from the ICU 3 days prior, and they were anxiously waiting for him to wake up. Kiri would merge her soul with his to communicate, and while he could hear her, he couldn't move or feel anything. In a dreamlike state, Izuku asked Kiri if he had died a hero. She reassured him that he had come close but had ultimately won the battle. She had used all her energy from her healing sword on him, and it was still recharging. She promised to visit him regularly. After what felt like an eternity in a coma, Izuku finally opened his eyes. The bright light was overwhelming, and pain coursed through his body. He looked around the hospital room, noticing a table overflowing with cards and flowers. Spotting the nurse call button, he attempted to reach for it, but pain shot through his shoulder, causing him to emit a raspy sound instead of a yell. Fortunately, a nurse passing by heard the noise and rushed in, quickly leaving to fetch a doctor and close family. Moments later, Bakugo, Shoto, Shinso, Hisashi, and Aizawa burst through the door. Only Aizawa and Mike were allowed to touch him, while the others waited for him to regain some mobility. Izuku tried to speak, but only more raspy sounds emerged. Hisashi quickly brought him a glass of water with a bendy straw, advising him to sip it. Izuku nodded in appreciation and took slow sips. His first words were to his father, expressing relief that Aizawa was okay, accompanied by a smile. Aizawa was left in shock, realizing the extent of what his son had sacrificed to save him. He expressed his fear when they found Izuku, emphasizing how close he had come to death and pleading with him never to put himself in danger again. Just then, Dr. Himoya entered, recognizing Izuku from Kiri's memories, which only fueled Izuku's anger. The doctor greeted him, but Izuku interrupted, insisting that he be addressed as young Aizawa and expressing his disdain for the situation. The doctor stuttered, asking if Izuku was feeling all right, to which Izuku replied with sarcasm, indicating he was far from fine. The doctor explained they needed to conduct another MRI to check for any swelling or issues affecting his brain. Izuku vehemently denied needing it, claiming the only thing wrong was the memories left in his head. He accused the doctor of being a monster, comparing him to his mother for the way he treated children. The doctor attempted to dismiss Izuku's claims, but Izuku countered that Kiri was the only one who knew every detail about him and could merge her mind with his. He suggested calling her in, and soon Kiri entered the room, greeting Izuku and acknowledging her father with a mix of familiarity and tension. Izuku wished the moment could last even longer. 2 days later, he was finally cleared to go home, but both Kiri and Koyu Himoya had mysteriously vanished, leaving everyone puzzled. He still had to rely on crutches due to his sprained tendons, which frustrated him since he could only manage light exercises like crunches. Using the crutches was a challenge as his wrists were still recovering. During the drive home, Aizawa asked how he was feeling while Hisashi drove and Shinso sat in the back. Izuku, propped up in the middle row with his legs on the seats, responded that he was doing well but would need their help for the next few weeks. Hisashi teased him, insisting it wasn't that bad, but Izuku shot him a glare, reminding him how difficult it was to manage daily tasks with a broken hand. Hisashi laughed, nearly causing a mishap with the car. Determined, Izuku pulled himself up with his stronger arm and gripped Shinso's hand tightly, playfully threatening him. Shinso, startled, quickly conceded. Aizawa interrupted their antics, reminding them they were home and urging Izuku to be careful as he made his way inside. Upon entering, Izuku was taken aback to find most of his teachers and classmates gathered in the living room and along the staircase. They all cheered, welcoming him home. Grinning widely, he expressed his gratitude, even though he felt overwhelmed by the surprise party that lasted well into the night. As guests began to leave, Shoto rushed over to Izuku, mentioning someone was waiting for him in his room. Intrigued, Izuku asked who it was, but Shoto hesitated, saying the person seemed familiar. Izuku's heart raced as he hobbled up the stairs, determined to confront whoever it was. When he burst into his room, he found a familiar figure, standing there looking at the pictures on the wall. Izuku's heart soared as he realized 𝗟𝗶𝐻 was alive, his scars mysteriously gone. He felt a wave of relief wash over him, realizing 𝗟𝗶𝐻 had survived due to a healing ability. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 urged Izuku to take care of 𝗪𝗪, expressing his fear of losing him again. Just then, 𝗪𝗪 appeared in the doorway, suspicious and defensive. Izuku called 𝗪𝗪 over, sensing the need for a serious conversation. Izuku asked 𝗪𝗪 to retrieve a family photo, which depicted a younger version of him with his family, including his brother Tuya, who was believed to be dead. As 𝗪𝗪 examined the photo, he began to recognize 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸, who revealed himself as Tuya. The revelation left 𝗪𝗪 in disbelief, but he quickly embraced his brother, promising never to let him go again. A year later, Izuku and his classmates had progressed to their 3rd year. 𝗪𝗪 had proposed to Izuku, and they were now engaged. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 had enrolled at 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐚𝐫𝐲 and became part of the warpack, taking on a new role as a hero. The League of Villains had been notably absent, allowing the heroes to focus on their training. While patrolling 𝗎𝐿𝐴 City, Izuku and 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻 heard a faint whimpering from an alleyway. They discovered a young boy, no older than 6, sitting alone with bandaged arms and glowing blue eyes. Concerned, 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻 approached the boy, but Izuku felt a surge of dread as the boy stuttered an apology, revealing he had been coerced into something dangerous. As the boy's eyes glowed brighter, Izuku froze, overwhelmed by fear and guilt. 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻 quickly scooped the boy up, pulling him out of the alley, but Izuku remained paralyzed, shaking and crying, repeating that he was sorry. 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻, panicking, demanded to know what had happened, desperate to understand the situation. The rest of the patrol group rounded the corner and found Izuku huddled in a corner, clutching his hair and visibly distressed. Nearby, 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻 was shouting at a young boy, creating an atmosphere of confusion and concern. The unspoken question echoed in everyone's minds: what had happened here? 𝗪𝗪 rushed to his boyfriend, who had collapsed and was crying out apologies. 𝗪𝗪, slightly apprehensive, confronted 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻, demanding to know what had transpired. 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻, on the verge of panic, explained that they had separated from the group after hearing sniffling and crying from an alleyway. They discovered the child, who had apologized and claimed someone would hurt his mother if he didn't comply. 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻 described how the boy's eyes had glowed brightly, causing Izuku to tremble and express regret, wishing things hadn't turned out this way. 𝗪𝗪's voice trembled as he pressed the boy for details, asking what he had done. The child, terrified, confessed that he had used his quirk to erase memories, leaving only the bad ones. The group exchanged shocked glances, their anger rising. They demanded to know who had coerced the boy into this action. The child stammered that he didn't know the man's name, but he had heard someone referred to as Handman. The name sent a chill through the group. 𝗪𝗪 whispered that this individual had targeted Izuku long before they had met him. Izuku had only wanted to help the boy, to ensure his safety. But now he was overwhelmed by a flood of dark memories, feeling as if all the good moments had vanished, leaving only pain and regret. Voices in his mind berated him, reminding him of his failures and the harm he had caused. As Izuku backed further into the corner, blocking everything out, he felt as though he was being manipulated by Shigaraki, who watched from a distance, contemplating the next move. The villains saw the boy as a mere pawn, disposable and insignificant. Izuku was confused and frightened, questioning why everyone was there and who these people were. He recognized some faces, including 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻, who had tormented him, and 𝗍𝗪HEAD, who had once called him a liability. Memories of past encounters flooded back, including a painful incident involving Momo. Summoning his resolve, Izuku stood shakily, pushing through the chaos in his mind. He glared at the assembled heroes and summoned his scythe, kicking 𝗪𝗪 away in a moment of desperation. He felt the weight of the cursed swords that had brought him so much pain and tore them off, casting them aside with disdain. Demanding to be left alone, Izuku's voice echoed with anger and fear. He threatened the group, his cold demeanor betraying the turmoil within. As 𝗏𝒀𝐻𝐻 attempted to reach out, Izuku screamed, overwhelmed by the voices in his head, begging for silence. In a moment of rage, he leaped up the side of a building and confronted the boy who had cursed him, declaring that death awaited him. The scythe struck deep, but the arrival of more heroes shifted the scene. Aizawa and Present Mic rushed to the forefront, pleading for Izuku to spare the boy, promising to find a solution. As Izuku transformed into a small monkey to climb faster, Aizawa activated his quirk, causing him to fall. Shoto quickly created an ice slide to catch him, but Izuku shattered it with a swing of his scythe, demanding to be left alone. He felt he didn't belong with them, trapped in a situation that spiraled beyond his control. He growled about belonging with his own kind, prompting some of the heroes to question what he meant. Aizawa asked slowly if Izuku remembered him. The boy responded with bitterness, recalling a past moment when Aizawa had been intoxicated. It struck everyone that their Izuku was lost to them. He no longer remembered the joyful times but only the pain and suffering. Frustration overtook him, and he yelled to silence the voices in his head, expressing his longing for them to leave him alone. The intensity of his emotions caused his voice to shift unexpectedly, and Dabi recognized the familiar tones of Toga and Jiro among the chaos. He informed the heroes of what was happening. Izuku felt overwhelmed, feeling worthless and trapped by his tormentors. He pleaded for them to go away, but they insisted on staying, claiming he needed someone to watch over him. In a moment of desperation, he screamed for them to leave him alone, holding a scythe awkwardly, the blade dangerously close to his throat. Those nearby sensed the gravity of the situation, but Bakugo, Shoto, and 𝗪𝐻 were too far away to intervene in time. Izuku shouted at the voices in his head, momentarily regaining clarity. He trembled as he expressed gratitude for the happiest year of his life, revealing his love for his father and friends before losing control again. The voices returned, and tears streamed down his face, mixing with the blood that trickled from his wounds. With a heavy heart, he tilted his head back and pointed the scythe, whispering about finally being free. In a tragic moment, he pressed the blade against his chin, and the sharp edge pierced through. The impact was swift, and he was gone before his eyes could close. A spray of red splattered onto those closest to him, Shoto, 𝗪𝐻, Bakugo, and Aizawa. The boy who had once been their beacon of hope was no more. The memories of his bravery, kindness, and unwavering spirit flooded their minds, leaving them devastated. Bakugo stared at his trembling hands, while Shoto and 𝗪𝐻 held Aizawa tightly. Mike fell to his knees, overwhelmed with grief and rage. They all understood that Shigaraki was responsible for this tragedy, and he would pay dearly for his actions. A crowd gathered, reporters hovering above, and Shoto, 𝗪𝐻, and Aizawa caught sight of a familiar figure trying to slip away. They quickly apprehended Shigaraki, pinning him against a police car. Aizawa confronted him, demanding to know why he had done this to an innocent boy. Shigaraki laughed coldly, claiming that Izuku had ruined his plans, so he had ruined Izuku's life in return. His laughter echoed with madness, drawing the attention of a powerful figure who descended from above, radiating an intimidating presence. Even Shigaraki seemed unnerved. She confronted him, declaring that he would come with her. With a swift motion, she incapacitated him, ensuring he would no longer pose a threat. As she made her escape, she warned the gathered heroes not to follow, hinting at the supernatural forces at play. A portal opened behind her, and she sent a message to Aizawa, revealing that Izuku was waiting for them. Relief washed over the group as the oppressive aura dissipated. Aizawa, along with Shoto, Bakugo, and Kiri, made their way home. He quietly instructed the medics to collect the body, tears streaming down his face. Upon entering the house, Aizawa heard the sound of running water and rushed to the kitchen, calling out for Izuku. The others followed, and to their astonishment, they saw a bluish-white form of the green-haired boy. He greeted them with a sad smile, revealing that he had regained his memories and witnessed everything that had transpired. Turning to 𝗪𝐻, he asked if he would be his successor, offering him a chance to bring him back to life. With a mixture of happiness and sadness, Izuku expressed his hope for a second chance. 𝗪𝐻 eagerly accepted, promising to take on the responsibility. Weeks passed since Izuku's departure, yet he remained a ghost, guiding 𝗪𝐻 in his training. Each morning, he ensured 𝗪𝐻 was ready for the day, making sure he ate and prepared for the challenges ahead. Today was special. It marked the day Izuku would return, and for the first time in weeks, he would be sleeping soundly, waiting for the moment he could reunite with his friends. Aizawa was taken aback when he returned home from patrol at 3 a.m. to find a child floating in his living room. His startled exclamation echoed through the house, waking everyone up. Bakugo, Kirishima, Dabi, Hisashi, Shoto, Shinso, and Denki rushed down the stairs, confusion written on their faces. Hisashi, still half asleep, asked what was wrong, only to be met with the sight that left him speechless. Izuku, now awake, noticed everyone staring at him and remarked on his appearance, teasingly pointing out that everyone already had partners. He then announced that he and Shinso had a surprise for everyone, urging Shinso to get some rest since they had a long day ahead. The house was ordered to maintain silence until 10 a.m., a challenge they managed to meet. As the clock struck 10, Hisashi's loud voice broke the quiet, only to be met with a shoe thrown in his direction. The others explained that Shinso needed his rest, which left everyone but Shinso looking shocked. Izuku pointed at Shinso, insisting they needed to discuss the day's events. They floated outside to a shaded tree where Izuku explained what was about to happen and the challenges they would face. He warned Shinso that the experience would be intense, likening it to a struggle against resistance, and advised him to wear clothes he wouldn't mind discarding since their outfits would change during the process. Shinso listened intently, though he looked puzzled. Izuku offered a special uniform from his closet if Shinso preferred, but encouraged him to stick with the outfit he would regenerate in. With a sense of urgency, Izuku urged Shinso to conserve his energy as they headed to the arena. Inside the indoor arena, everyone was gathered, unaware of the surprise that awaited them. Denki and Kirishima were sparring while Bakugo critiqued their techniques. Dabi and Shoto were engaged in a Pilates session, and Aizawa and Hisashi were deep in conversation about their relationship dynamics. Izuku floated in with Shinso, and as he connected with Shinso's mind, the familiar white fog enveloped them. After several tense moments filled with Shinso's struggles, silence fell. Izuku emerged, looking revitalized in his black muscle tank top, cargo breathes, combat boots, and a dark green flannel tied around his waist. Shinso stood beside him, looking both exhausted and exhilarated. Shinso's new attire consisted of an open black and purple kimono robe over a black muscle t-shirt, black joggers, combat boots, and equipped with 2 katanas and a handgun holster. He wore fingerless gloves that added to his striking appearance. Shoto was the first to react, rushing forward to embrace Izuku, expressing how much he had missed him. The others quickly joined in, congratulating Shinso on his swift readiness. Shinso then asked Izuku how it felt to have a physical body again. Izuku admitted it felt strange, especially since he had grown accustomed to floating everywhere. Bakugo, eager to test Izuku's mobility, pulled Shoto and Dabi away from him, causing Izuku to stumble as he tried to regain his balance. As the playful chaos unfolded, Hisashi and Aizawa were busy in the kitchen preparing a grand feast for everyone, inviting Nemuri, Nizu, Tashinori, and several classmates to join in the celebration. The atmosphere was filled with joy as they celebrated Izuku's return to his physical form and Shinso's new quirk. That night was filled with festivities, laughter, and friendly competitions in the arena. The house had returned to its lively state, and now Shinso faced the exciting challenge of 𝐼𝐶. It was the beginning of a remarkable journey ahead. It had been 6 months since Shinso and Izuku parted ways. Izuku had finally regained his full power, while Shinso had 𝐼𝐶 his swords and could even enhance plant growth using the life aspect of his quirk. The League of Villains made another attempt to attack Hosu, but it was short-lived. The Nomu they dispatched was weak against fire, and Endeavor arrived just in time. Izuku decided to take Shinso on his first official mission, which involved surveilling the alleyway in Mizudafu City where the League of Villains had their hideout. He reminded Shinso to stay calm and assured him that he could control which parts of his body became intangible. During Izuku's transition to his physical form, something had gone awry, or perhaps it had gone right, depending on one's perspective. His ability resembled Mirio Togata's quirk, permeation, but with a distinct difference. One was a quirk, while the other was an ability. Izuku leaped down from the rooftop where Shinso was concealed and floated through the door of the bar, embracing his ghostly form. No one seemed to notice him, perhaps because he appeared like a shadowy figure, blending into the surroundings. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 had returned after Izuku's supposed demise, falling into a deep depression over it, yet he still harbored animosity toward Shigaraki. The young man with black hair sat at the bar, spinning a shot glass on his finger while distractedly watching something on his phone. Mustard was dozing on the couch, while Shigaraki sat a few seats away, sipping from a shot glass and conversing with Spinner, who appeared bored. Twice was pacing back and forth, talking to himself and hugging a teddy bear, an oddly endearing sight for a villain. Mr. Compress was likely in his room, and 𝗟𝐼𝐬 was busy polishing his shot glass collection. Feeling a wave of boredom, Izuku decided to break the silence. He greeted the villains with enthusiasm, particularly singling out Shigaraki. The villains tensed, ready to attack, but their attempts passed right through him. He playfully warned them not to attack again, suggesting that they would regret it. Shigaraki, bewildered, shouted in disbelief, recalling how he had witnessed Izuku's death. Izuku casually dismissed his concerns, stating that it was none of Shigaraki's business. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 interjected, claiming it was indeed his business. Izuku turned to him, brushing off the comment and inquiring about how everyone was doing. He floated around, acknowledging each villain with a mix of humor and sarcasm. When he reached 𝗟𝗶𝐻, he whispered that it would be nice for him to visit, as it could get lonely. ♯, listening through the comms, questioned if he wasn't enough company. Izuku replied that friendship was never too much, then turned his attention to Mustard, asking about his life as a villain. Mustard seemed taken aback by the casual banter. Izuku continued to tease the villains, comparing himself to classic horror figures, evading their attempts to confront him. He noted that they were only there for surveillance and prepared to leave. Shigaraki's frustration peaked as he demanded to know what Izuku meant by "we." Izuku retorted with a string of colorful insults, expressing his disdain for the League and their previous attempts on his life. He floated out the door, quickly returning to ♯, who was waiting for him. Once outside, Izuku transformed into a condor, carrying ♯ as they soared away. Upon entering their home, they found Hisashi pacing anxiously, Aizawa hyperventilating, and Shoto in a state of panic, with Kirishima and Bakugo trying to calm him down. Denki sat in the corner, poking the air and drooling, surrounded by sparks. Izuku, confused by the chaos, asked what had happened. Hisashi erupted with joy upon seeing them alive, while Aizawa reminded them of the dangers posed by the League of Villains. The tension escalated into a shouting match, with Izuku struggling to make himself heard amidst the noise. Eventually, Aizawa and the others had to intervene, separating them and guiding them to their rooms. Shoto took care of Izuku's ears, ensuring he was all right before wishing him good night. As the days passed, Izuku regained his hearing and jokingly expressed a longing to playfully torment Hisashi about his hair. Hisashi, startled, sought refuge behind Aizawa, who sighed in exasperation. Hisashi then made a teasing remark that left Aizawa blushing, leading to a playful moment between them as they retreated to their room. Shoto wrapped his arms around Izuku, leaning down to kiss his neck, suggesting they could enjoy some quiet time together while the others were out. Izuku felt a rush of warmth as he blushed deeply, his cheeks turning a shade redder than Kirishima's vibrant hair. He let out a soft sound of surprise when Shoto playfully smacked him. Shoto's voice was low and teasing as he urged Izuku to use his words, and the greenette stammered his response, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. Shoto grinned, pleased with Izuku's reaction, and effortlessly lifted him over his shoulder, giving him another playful smack. Once in the bedroom, Izuku was gently placed on the bed, and Shoto retrieved 2 ropes in pastel green and white. A few moments later, Izuku found himself in a vulnerable position, arms tied in a way that made him feel both exposed and exhilarated. Shoto admired his handiwork, expressing how appealing Izuku looked all tied up. Izuku let out a soft whimper, calling out to Shoto, who responded with a husky tone, encouraging him to articulate his desires. The greenette pleaded for his partner, and Shoto, with a playful smirk, turned him over to face him, insisting that he beg for what he wanted. As Shoto teased him, Izuku gasped at the sensations, feeling a mix of pleasure and anticipation. Shoto continued to playfully torment him, drawing out the moment and making Izuku squirm with need. With a gentle yet firm touch, 𝗏𝗱 brought Izuku to the edge of joy, and the greenette found himself overwhelmed by the sensations, losing himself in the moment. Afterward, they both relaxed, and 𝗏𝗱 affectionately showered Izuku with soft kisses, expressing his love. Meanwhile, Bakugo and Kirishima were walking hand in hand with 𝗪𝐻 and Denki, returning from the movie theater. They joked about their friends, unaware of the events unfolding in the other room. 𝗪𝐻 suggested splitting up to find Izuku and 𝗏𝗱, and as he approached their door, he was taken aback by what he saw. His face paled, and he barely made it down the stairs before his knees buckled. Denki rushed to his side, concerned, while Bakugo and Kirishima joined them, ready to confront whatever had shocked 𝗪𝐻. The tension in the air was palpable as 𝗪𝐻 struggled to explain what he had witnessed, his expression a mix of fear and disbelief. Bakugo's curiosity piqued, and he pressed for details, while 𝗪𝐻's response left them all stunned. The revelation sent Bakugo into fits of laughter, and the others exchanged glances of disbelief. As Hisashi and Aizawa descended the stairs, they inquired about the commotion. Kirishima explained the situation, and Aizawa's protective instincts kicked in as he headed upstairs, determined to put an end to the antics happening under his roof. When he opened the door, the sight of ropes and a towel confirmed his suspicions. With a swift motion, Aizawa used his scarf to pull 𝗏𝗱 out of the room, dragging him down the hallway. Izuku, unable to shift due to the constraints, followed closely behind, both of them feeling the bumps along the way as they were pulled into the living area. Realizing they were at the mercy of Aizawa, 𝗏𝗱 groaned in resignation, and Izuku could only brace himself for the unexpected consequences of their earlier activities. This moment was about to take an unexpected turn. The entire family gathered in the kitchen as Aizawa stepped back into the room. Hisashi inquired about the boys' whereabouts, prompting Aizawa to growl out a warning, urging the boys not to hide. With a flick of his scarf, the boys tumbled out from around the corner. Izuku rubbed his head, having bumped it harder than he intended, and remarked on the truth of a saying he had heard. Aizawa, with a tone that suggested he wanted silence, asked him to elaborate, but Izuku, as usual, didn't heed the warning. He boldly stated that their motto was to either yeet or be yeeted. Everyone except Aizawa chuckled at the exchange, though he shot a glare at the boys. The energetic blonde broke the tension by asking Izuku about the marks on his arms. In a moment of panic, Izuku blurted out a response that caught everyone off guard. 𝗏𝗱 face-bombed at the comment, while Aizawa growled in disapproval, and the others laughed. Aizawa began a lecture, reminding Izuku of something he had said 2 years prior. Izuku retorted, questioning how he was supposed to remember such details, comparing it to asking Aizawa what he had called him during a past incident. Aizawa responded with the nickname Izuku had used, emphasizing the need for improvement. As a consequence, Aizawa declared that 𝗏𝗱 would be sleeping on the couch in his and Hisashi's room, while Izuku would be in 𝗪𝐻 and Denki's room, with extra training assigned to both of them. Izuku interrupted, insisting he was the trainer, not the trainee, and jokingly transferred the extra training to 𝗏𝗱. 𝗏𝗱 responded with a playful remark, and the atmosphere lightened as Aizawa knocked their heads together gently, causing them to fall into a peaceful slumber. He reassured everyone that they would be fine. These are her 3 swords, each with a distinct purpose. The first sword is meant for taking life, the second for giving life, and the third for healing and mending injuries. To use the third sword, she simply touches the blade to the wound for it to work. It was a month after the unusual incident, and Izuku remained unfazed. He and 𝗏𝗱 continued their playful antics when everyone else was asleep, and since they hadn't been caught yet, they felt emboldened to push the boundaries further. Graduation from U was that evening, and unbeknownst to Izuku, 𝗏𝗱 had a plan to propose to him again, this time properly with a real ring. The ring was black and green with intricate silver patterns, while 𝗏𝗱's was black and red, also adorned with silver designs. As graduation approached, 𝗏𝗱 stood nervously in line, not for the ceremony itself but for the moment he would call Izuku up to the stage to propose once more. Principal Nizu smiled knowingly as he announced, "Next, we have number 2 out of the big 3. 𝗏𝗱 Todoroki." The crowd erupted in applause, cheers, and whistles, with Izuku, Aizawa, and 𝗪𝐻 cheering the loudest. 𝗏𝗏 smiled faintly as he began his speech. He expressed deep gratitude to Izuku for helping him become who he was today. He recalled how he had been in a dark place when they first met, contemplating giving up. However, their paths crossed, and Izuku saved him, even helping to improve his relationship with his father. 𝗏𝗏 then invited Izuku to join him on stage. With a cheerful demeanor, Izuku floated up to the stage, introducing himself as Izuku the Friendly Ghost Man, and acknowledging 𝗏𝗏's support. He placed the microphone back on its stand and shared a quick kiss with 𝗏𝗏. However, 𝗏𝗏 gently pushed him away, causing Izuku to look confused and a bit sad. As 𝗏𝗏 knelt down and revealed a green and white box, he took a deep breath, filled with anxiety. He spoke earnestly, recalling the promise ring he had given Izuku before the incident and expressing his longing to offer a real engagement ring now. He asked Izuku if he would marry him, opening the box to reveal the 2 rings and placing the green one on Izuku's finger. Izuku's excitement bubbled over as he exclaimed his agreement, only to be interrupted by Principal Nizu's reminder to refrain from cursing. The crowd erupted in laughter, and cheers filled the air as the newly engaged couple made their way to their families. 𝗟𝗏𝐻 stood with a neutral expression, observing Izuku and 𝗏𝗏 with a steady gaze. His eyes fell on their intertwined hands, and he expressed his pride in 𝗏𝗏. 𝗏𝗏 then turned to Izuku, declaring that this marked the beginning of their forever. Izuku, still processing the moment, responded with hope for a good life together. Suddenly, a booming voice interrupted their embrace, proclaiming pride in the 2 young men. Izuku shot an irritated look toward the source of the voice, ready to respond.